When Amanda Carter disappeared, her killer thought he'd got off scot-free, but he hadn't considered the future. A revolution in forensic science was about to happen, and a team of detectives had a very long memory.
Mr. Carter had reported his daughter missing to the police, and they were concerned about her safety, basically, because it wasn't in her nature to not go home of an evening. They told us Mandy and Debbie had gone out on a Saturday night to celebrate Mandy's birthday, which was on that following Monday, that they were a very close-knit family. Mandy, Debbie and Brenton still lived at home.
Very nice environment for a young girl to grow up in. A very loving, warm family, and normally we wouldn't be that concerned about somebody aged 21 not arriving home, but they assured us that she regularly came home.
We went through her belongings there just to see, for example, if there was any clothing missing, bags missing, bank books missing, which would indicate to us perhaps that she'd run away or wasn't going to come home that night, but there was nothing to indicate that.
So the warning bells rang fairly early in the piece, and it didn't seem to be just a normal missing person.
Immediately, police started to piece together what they could of Amanda's last movements.
Debbie, the sister we spoke to, she told us that they'd been to a number of hotels the night before. They had been enjoying themselves in the evening. They'd had a little bit to drink, and after midnight, when they were down at the Hope and Anchor, Debbie didn't have a very good recollection at all of what she did, who she was with, and where her sister was. A lot of people had talked to her at Mandy Carter, but there was nothing to suggest that she was going to do anything out of the ordinary. Everybody that we spoke to that knew her said that they thought she would go home by taxi, and that was her usual method of getting home.
So we started making inquiries with taxi companies just to ascertain as to who was working that night.
I was driving cab 99 in and around the Hobart area. It was a rather busy night. I told police that I'd seen a figure hunched up in the doorway of the old CML building at around about 2:45, 3 o'clock in the morning.
In fact, a number of taxi drivers reported the same sighting.
Nobody could say for sure that was Mandy Carter. A lot of people said it looked like her, and it seemed a logical taxi rank for her to go.
However, the times of the sightings varied between 1:30 and 3:30 a.m.
But about 3 taxi drivers said that they saw a yellow taxi at the front of the cab stand and in the area where this girl was sitting on the steps.
One of the taxi drivers had seen a taxi driver go up to the CML steps and pick up a handbag and throw it into the taxi. This taxi was right in front of him, so he identified that taxi, and it was cab 58.
58's picked up a handbag.
That was obviously an avenue of inquiry we wanted to seriously look at, because Mandy had a handbag with her, so there was a possibility that this handbag belonged to Mandy Carter.
One cab driver even suggested to us that he thought that the girl sitting on the steps actually got into that cab and the cab drove away. Now, if that was the case, we may have Mandy Carter leaving the CML steps, and it was important that we get hold of that taxi driver as soon as possible.
Amanda Carter's 22nd birthday dawned. She had been missing for 24 hours. Police began searching Hobart for any sign of her. They were also on the lookout for a yellow cab, number 58.
The yellow cab was owned by a fellow called Wayne Highland.
I think it was about the only yellow Falcon on the road at the time as a taxi.
And about 5 o'clock, we actually found him out at the airport.
So John Blue and I went out there immediately, found Highland with his cab, and when we opened the boot, we found a handbag in the boot.
He told us that he'd found it at the CML steps on the Saturday night, Sunday morning, and he had intended to hand it into the cab office, which he hadn't done. If she's got Mandy's handbag in the car, well, there's a potential that Mandy was in here as well, so he must know something. We thought this is a real potential suspect.
Amanda Carter had been missing for 48 hours when police found what they believed was her handbag in the boot of a yellow taxi. That taxi was impounded and the driver, Wayne Highland, was now being questioned.
We spoke to Highland at the police headquarters. He told us that Saturday night, Sunday morning, he'd been at the GPA. He'd spoken to a female there who has been sitting on the steps and asked her if she wanted a cab. She said she didn't and she was waiting for a friend. He then got back into his cab and drove round to the cab rank in Murray Street outside Myer. He got a fare there out to Windermere. Then he came back into the city, went back to the GPA, and he then said that he went up to the steps again and there found a handbag. This was the handbag that we found in his car. The woman that he'd spoken to on the GPA steps, he wasn't obviously able to identify her as Mandy Carter because he didn't know her, but from the description that we gave him, he said it could have been her.
Was the girl he saw Amanda Carter? And if so, who was she waiting for? More importantly, at this stage, was the bag picked up by the taxi driver that of Amanda's?
We were pretty confident it was going to be Mandy Carter's handbag, but there were no credit cards, no identifying things in the handbag at all, but it was very similar to the handbag that had been described as being Amanda Carter's handbag.
So we went down to Taroona and spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Carter and Debbie, showed them the handbag, and to our bewilderment and astonishment, they said no, it wasn't her handbag.
And they were quite adamant about it, and we said, well, we think it is. And they said, no, sorry, it's not her handbag, and we know her handbag and that's not it. So straight away we gave a lot of media and we said, here's a handbag, we want to know whose it is.
Detectives have interviewed the taxi driver who found the handbag and who had previously talked to the woman, asking her if she needed a cab. The woman is of similar appearance to Mandy Carter and police urgently want to talk with her.
We looked at different scenarios. One possible scenario was that she'd picked up the wrong handbag when she left the Hope and Anchor, and that somebody else had Mandy's handbag. But if that was the case, nobody came forward with Mandy's handbag. Another scenario was that Mandy Carter wasn't on the CML steps at all, and that it was some other female, and who was she? And if it wasn't Mandy, where did Mandy go after she left the Hope and Anchor?
Luckily, Amanda's sister Debbie started to recall events of that night at the hotel.
Debbie was able to recall that she and Amanda departed from the Hope and Anchor Hotel the early hours of the 27th in company with two male companions.
They accompanied these two unknown men up Macquarie Street. We think that they walked separately, Mandy walking with one male and Debbie walking with the other male.
She believed that when they reached the mall area, they parted, and she assumed that Amanda was going to the taxi rank to catch a taxi en route home.
So it was absolutely essential we identify these two men, because it may well have been that Mandy had gone with this man and that he was the person responsible for her disappearance.
We had various descriptions, but in essence they were people that were in their 20s, and one was described as a man with a beard.
We were very lucky in some sense because one of the guys had a bright red beard. Basically we plastered the media with calls of help to try and get these guys.
As far as we knew, she may well have gone with them, and she may not have been on the taxi stand at all, or she may have been on the taxi stand and then decided to leave with one of those two fellows, and she may be still with them.
This could well have been the person the taxi driver had said Amanda had been waiting for.
Okay, I'm waiting for someone.
But like the owner of the bag, the bearded man didn't come forward.
Last night, the Hobart Police Headquarters switchboard was jammed with calls immediately after the Attorney-General, Brian Miller, announced on television that the state government had offered a reward of up to $10,000 for information on Miss Carter's whereabouts.
Wild rumours began circulating, with Amanda sighted all over Australia.
We had a report that she may have gone to Cairns with an ex-boyfriend.
There was people saying she was a drug runner.
We had reports that she was at Swansea on the east coast of Tasmania in a log truck.
She'd gone to Queensland with a bikie gang.
We had various clairvoyants ringing up and saying, well, we can tell you where she is, and all these ridiculous propositions that one way or another you've probably got to follow up, because you've got to be in a position to say, yes, that's been followed up and we're satisfied there's nothing in it.
For Mandy's father, Don Carter, the past week has been desperate.
Anybody who could throw any light or has seen anything that may be a bit unusual, just to come forward and tell the police.
You've got some information for me, have you?
After about 6 days of the investigation, we received an anonymous call at police headquarters to say that 3 well-known criminals had left the state on the Sunday afternoon. She went missing on the early hours of Sunday morning, and that they'd left the state and she'd gone with them. And they had left, and they were due to report on bail conditions on the Monday. And on the Monday they didn't report for bail conditions. We thought that that was a real possibility, that perhaps she'd gone with them, that she may have been abducted.
Amanda Carter had been missing now for over a week. Police had information she may have been abducted by 3 known fugitives who had fled the state.
We received a call from the police in Mackay in North Queensland, and they said those fellows that absconded bail in Tasmania, we've found them in a stolen car in Mackay and we've got them in custody. I went to Queensland, and after interviewing them all, I was quite satisfied that they weren't involved in the disappearance of the girl. They even admitted committing a crime on the Saturday night that she went missing, and in fact they were terrified that they were looked on as key suspects.
Another lead down, and the police were still no closer to finding Amanda Carter or the 2 men last seen with her at the Hope and Anchor Tavern.
The 2 mystery men still kept coming up in our inquiry. We had to try and identify them. We just weren't able to. It was just bizarre that this guy with the bright red beard could have slipped away and nobody knew who he was.
They were crucial because they were probably the last 2 people to see Mandy and Debbie after they left the Hope and Anchor. We certainly were concerned about it because we thought, well, if they've got nothing to hide, why wouldn't they come forward?
As detectives continued their search for these 2 main witnesses, or prime suspects, the results from the forensic examination on the yellow taxi were coming in. At the time it was impounded, police believed the brown bag found in its boot had belonged to Amanda Carter.
The taxi was being examined as a missing person case. We were looking for any evidence for Amanda Carter being present in that taxi. I collected a Fanta can on which we were looking for saliva. It was an empty can, so someone had obviously drunk it. And there was a tartan rug which was in the boot, which was taken for looking for human hair fibres or any contact which might lead us to where we were looking for the missing person. On the right-hand side, on one of the mudguard ornaments, there was a small amount of what looked like reed material.
We couldn't find anything to connect Mandy Carter to that particular taxi. But in the middle of the back seat, the forensic people found a stain. And when we asked them what it was, they described it as a seminal stain, suggesting to us that somebody had either masturbated on the back seat or that somebody had had intercourse on the back seat of that taxi.
The scientists basically thought the stain must have been reasonably recent because if it had been a taxi, people would go coming in and out the taxi and it would eventually disappear.
So it needed some sort of explanation.
Hyland was interviewed about that, as to whether he'd had sexual intercourse, and he said he hadn't. And he was even asked us, for example, had he masturbated, and he also said he hadn't.
He said that he was the only one that drove the cab. So chances are that he was the contributor.
So it was important to try and get his blood group in, so we asked him for his blood, and he refused to give it, which he was quite entitled to do, I might add, as well.
The stain and his refusal to give blood rang alarm bells. But his alibi of taking his last passenger to Windermere in the early hours of Sunday morning checked out.
We eventually found the woman, and she confirmed that she had been taken home by a taxi driver in a car similar to Highlands, and that he fitted the description, and that was consistent. So that took the heat off him a little bit, and we had to look at alternatives.
A revised identikit picture was issued by police today, who hope the man may be able to add to Debbie's statements. After more than a week's search, police say they are both frustrated and baffled by the disappearance.
Attention was back on Debbie, Amanda's 19-year-old sister.
Debbie was traumatised. Of course it wasn't her fault, but she did in some degree blame herself. If they had remained together, she would have been safe.
It was really frustrating, the fact that Debbie wasn't able to give us any information, or very limited amount of information.
In desperation, the police asked Debbie to undergo hypnosis.
We had been working really long hours, 17, 18 hours a day, and the hypnotherapist was talking in a very monotone voice.
My recollection is myself and John Blue went to sleep. And but it was worth a try. We didn't achieve a lot, but it was worth a try. And at that stage, we were trying every avenue to try and get a lead. So we thought just a small thing may have helped us in the investigation, but it didn't happen.
Then 2 weeks after Amanda disappeared, the police got a breakthrough.
This young fella at Tudda on the west coast of Tasmania picked up a week-old newspaper and saw what he thought looked very much like him as an identikit picture in the paper. Contacted police, and he was our man.
It was a major breakthrough when we had the two people come forward and say, "Excuse me, but we are the people that you're looking for." They were Stanley Hibbins and Lester Govett. One had a red beard, so they were quite sure that they were the people.
Both men had left Hobart on the Sunday and had claimed to have no knowledge of Amanda's disappearance.
But they recalled everything that occurred, and they said, yes, we went to the Hope and Anchor. We met Mandy Carter and her sister Debbie, and we talked to them at the Hope and Anchor. And afterwards, we left with them, and they said they put the time at about 2:30. They said they walked up Macquarie Street. Lester Govett said that he was with Debbie.
Oh, look, it's an
Stanley Hibbins said he was with Mandy. Stanley Hibbins decided to make a phone call home to his parents in Victoria.
Oh, Mum. Yeah, no, it's me.
So he leaves Mandy to make the phone call, and he's talking to his mum for perhaps about 15 minutes, he says. When he goes back, Mandy had gone.
Is it all right? Yeah, good.
We actually went to Victoria and spoke to his parents, and they verified that they received the call in the early hours of the morning. Govett took it a step further because he said prior to leaving the GPO, he actually had a conversation with Mandy. He yelled out to her across the road, and at that stage she was intending to catch a taxi home.
Yeah, I'm fine, I've got money.
All right then, we'll see you later.
Okay, see you later. Bye.
That gelled pretty well with what we knew. Virtually said to us that the female on the CML steps opposite the GPO was in all probability Mandy Carter. So we had a time and we had an intention, and I think after that, that directed our investigations in a certain way, and that way was along the lines of what we first thought, that she probably got in a taxi.
Amanda Carter had been celebrating her 22nd birthday. At approximately 3 a.m, she separated from her sister and the two men she had been celebrating with to catch a taxi home. Numerous cab drivers had seen a woman matching her description near the taxi rank. Some believed she had got into the taxi owned by Wayne Highland.
We were aware that Hyland had previous convictions for assault and stealings and burglaries, but nothing of a serious nature.
He was basically what I would call a small-time crook, a bit of a sleaze bag. Arrogant, I would call his attitude, an arrogant attitude, and fairly cocky.
But the police had nothing to link Hyland to Amanda's disappearance, except a suspicious stain on the back seat of the cab that was now providing some new information.
There's a possibility that stain on the back seat of the taxi was just from an act of masturbation, and all you would find would be sperm, but there was a female component. And when you see that, you know you've got a compound stain.
The forensic people thought that there were two separate blood groupings in that particular stain. The contributors were a male and a female, so that we deduced from that, and we thought it was reasonable that probably a male and female had intercourse on the back seat of that taxi.
But at the time we took samples from the taxi, we didn't have a sample from Amanda, we didn't have a body or anything, so basically there was nothing to do a comparison with.
Wayne Hyland had already refused to give a sample of his blood for comparison testing. But the detectives decided to question him again in what they described as a robust interview.
Over a period of 4 or 5 hours, he was interrogated, he was interviewed, he was spoken to, he's conferred with. All manner and means in relation to information was put to him. He emphatically denied any knowledge of Amanda's whereabouts.
He was adamant that he hadn't picked up Mandy Carter. He was adamant that he never had her in his taxi. He still couldn't explain the stain on the back seat.
How did the seminal stains appear on the rear seat of your vehicle, be it a taxi or a private vehicle? And he says, I've got no idea. Who did you lend the vehicle to? Has anyone else been in possession of the vehicle? All those type of questions. He had the opportunity to say, yes, I loaned it to a guy, I can't remember his name, he's a mate, he wanted to borrow it for a couple, but he didn't say that. He answered every question, gave an answer, but I had no doubt that he was telling lies, but we couldn't move him.
He admitted what he had to admit to us. He didn't volunteer any extra information other than what he thought we knew.
I was just convinced, I had that gut feeling that he was responsible for the disappearance of Amanda Carter.
Police closely looked at Hyland's movements from the time he had taken the fare to Windermere and then picked up the brown bag at the steps where Amanda Carter had been seen.
He said after that was when he finished duty, he had filled up his cab and then went to sleep at Windermere Beach.
But there were no witnesses to his sleeping arrangements that night. But he had been seen at the petrol station.
2 other taxi drivers saw Gerald Wayne Hyland, the cab driver, known as Wayne Hyland or Fatty Wayne, at the service station, and he appeared quite nervous and jumpy, and they asked him what was wrong. And at one stage he told another taxi driver to piss off.
Piss off!
This was about 3:30 a.m. and the station was only minutes from where Amanda Carter had last been seen at the taxi rank.
He was very much a very, very strong suspect.
Then on the 11th of September, late in the afternoon, I received a call to say that there had been a body found. It was a body of a young female, and it was strongly suspected that it may have been Mandy Carter.
The body was found here very late yesterday by a trout fisherman along the end of a dead-end road, Riverside Drive, which runs along the Derwent River. It's near Bridgewater, about 20 kilometres from the GPO where Mandy Carter was last seen alive 45 days ago. The position of the body was face down, and the area indicates that it would have been impossible for the body to have floated down the river. In other words, it's almost certain that she was dumped here.
At that stage, the tide was out and she was basically on a reasonably dry area. The hands were raised above her head like that, as if someone had actually pulled her along.
The body was partly undressed, which indicated perhaps to us that something had actually occurred sexually.
And at first light today, forensic scientists began their detailed examination. Police had to wait until the high tide before lifting the body out.
The body was taken up by the mortuary ambulance and conveyed to the mortuary of the Royal Hobart Hospital. When it was there, one of the family friends came in and did the identification, said, yes, this is the body of Amanda Carter.
We got a pathologist's report not long after that, and there was damage to the mouth, suggesting that somebody had punched Mandy in the mouth, and that probably rendered her unconscious, and an attempt had been made to strangle her.
But strangulation was not the cause of death. Amanda Carter had drowned. As she breathed in the waters of the Derwent River, tiny organisms called diatoms were also inhaled, and these were found in her internal organs at the autopsy. Was her drowning an accident or murder?
It seemed to me that there was a distinct possibility that her head had been forcefully held underwater because of the position of her hands.
But who had dragged her into that spot? As a routine, vaginal swabs were taken.
On examination of the slides, we found semen present. The most heaviest concentration was in the high vaginal area, and that's not surprising because she was face down with the tide coming in and out. The high vaginal area was protected from the water by the air pockets, and that's why we found some reasonable evidence.
But at this point in forensic technology, there wasn't enough sperm in the sample to do any testing, and they still didn't have blood from their main suspect to compare. So for now, detectives would have to rely on old-fashioned footwork to find the evidence they needed to put Wayne Highland at the crime scene.
As to anybody that they see in this area here, any cars I've seen going in here, any fishermen that they know do come here a lot, because it's a fair bet, because whoever dumped her here has got to know the area. We spoke to all the local people as to vehicles that were going up and down Riverside Drive, and we had a number of reports of cars in the area. We had some reports of taxis.
There was one report that a cab had been seen along there, and the description given by the person was that the driver had a head like a bastard pig, which I think fitted Highland quite well.
When Mandy Carter was last seen alive after going to a disco on July the 27th, she told friends she was going to take a taxi home.
Well, we at least know now in which direction the offender has taken her. There doesn't seem to be any doubt that she's been driven to this area.
We also did a lot of work with Highland's car, with the dirt that was found under the mudguard, and the best we could do was that it was similar to some of the red dirt that was up in that particular area, but unfortunately they couldn't say it is the same. And the grass was similar to some of the grasses that were in the general Bridgewater area, so we couldn't definitively say, yes, that grass or that dirt came from that area just north of Riverside Drive. It was frustrating because we were very keen on solving this through forensic science. We thought that forensics could tell us something. We thought that we would get something from that crime scene that would link us to Highland, but we didn't. The best we did from the crime scene was some of the witnesses that said that they saw a cab coming and going and a description of a person in a cab that generally fitted Highland.
So once again, police questioned him. But this time, they took him out to the crime scene.
He agreed to do this. He was very pleasant. The idea of taking him at night was to obviously catch him off guard.
We spoke to him there, and he, at that stage, said yes, he had been there.
He said, yes, I've been here quite often fishing, drove the taxi in this area, and, well, you've got to accept that because it's an area where you would go fishing and an area where you'd drive your taxi.
But he was adamant that he hadn't gone up there on the night in question, that he hadn't taken Mandy Carter, and I can't tell you any more about it than what I've told you the last 2 or 3 times you've interviewed me. We had a circumstantial case and I knew it, and I suspect that he knew it, and he wasn't giving too much away.
He didn't move. You prove it. If you think I did it, charge me.
He then claimed he was being harassed. I suppose to some extent he was, but I don't call it a harassment. It was an investigation and had to continue.
And I remember saying to him, well, you want to get used to it because there'll be more of these interviews. Because we made it quite clear to him that we had no doubt in our mind and in the minds of all the other detectives that he was responsible for the death of Amanda Carter.
8 months on, the inquest into Amanda's death was underway, with most of the attention focusing on the seminal stain in the back seat of the taxi.
The swab from the back seat of the taxi showed both Group A and Group B, but it was very difficult to allocate whether the female component was A and the male component was B, or whether the female component was B and the male component was A.
Blood from Amanda's body had been classified as Group A, but the red cells were broken down and the result was suspect.
To confirm that the sample result that we got from Amanda Carter was a true A, we then examined the blood from the family. We established within a reasonable probability that her blood group type was A.
So the A component on the back seat of the taxi could have been Amanda's. But was Wayne Highland's blood Group B?
Now, the problem we'd had all along was that Highland had refused to give us a sample of his blood. So we devised a bit of a plan after talking to John Presser, who said that he could get blood groupings from cigarette butts, saliva in cigarette butts.
I gave him a cigarette out of my own packet and watched what he did with the stub. And I got hold of the finished cigarette and put it into an exhibit bag, and from that, forensic people were able to determine his blood grouping from his saliva.
The conclusion was that his blood grouping was the same as one of the blood groupings that was in the seminal stain.
But that evidence was not available to the court. At the end of the proceedings, all that could be noted was that a female with blood group A had intercourse in that taxi. It didn't exclude Amanda, but it wasn't 100%.
I couldn't determine to the satisfaction of the magistrate that Amanda Carter had actually been in that taxi.
The coroner gave an open finding that the 22-year-old's death was by drowning caused by persons unknown.
So we basically put the evidence in the deep freeze and sat on it until we could find some better way of working out what the evidence could tell us.
We were somewhat despondent, I suppose. We hadn't solved the case. We all knew the family quite well. We'd constantly said to them, we'll solve this case. We think we know who did it and we'll solve it. But of course, at this point in time, we hadn't solved anything.
But in 12 years' time, things would be different, and Lupo Prinz and his antagonist would meet again. After a night out on the town, celebrating her birthday, Amanda Carter never made it home. 6 weeks later, her body was found dumped on the banks of the Derwent River. Police were convinced that Wayne Highland was responsible for her death. The stain on the back seat of his taxi indicated that Amanda might have been there, but it wasn't definitive.
We always worked on the theory that perhaps one day we would be able to analyse that material and it might tell us a lot more than 2 blood groupings, which is what it was telling us in 1980. And we were hoping that somewhere along the line, Wayne Highland would make a mistake or somebody would give him up or something that would happen.
That wish came true. 13 years after Amanda disappeared, there was a revolution in forensic science.
We became aware of something called DNA that had been applied in criminal cases in the UK, which was able to tell you a lot more than blood groupings. It was like a genetic fingerprint. That was very exciting for us because we thought that there may be a possibility it could yield a profile of possibly the people who were contributors to the seminal stain that we had.
Swabs from that stain and Amanda Carter's blood were now taken out of the deep freeze and sent to a scientist in Melbourne for testing. Could this cold case now be solved?
He got a result from the swab from the back seat of the taxi that showed that Amanda Carter contributed to that stain. And the probability that it is her is 1 in 140,000.
It meant that statistically speaking, there was a strong probability that her DNA was in the seminal stone. In other words, he was virtually putting her in the taxi.
This was really exciting stuff. I mean, you know, all these years have gone by, and we perhaps have got our man.
It was time to catch up with their favourite suspect, now living in Melbourne. He thought the local detectives brought him in to discuss some issues connected with a bogus charity scam he was involved in. Then Lupa Prinz entered the room.
He saw us and his face went quite grey, actually, and he was shaking, and I said, "Remember me?" As you're aware, I'm Superintendent Prinz. This is Detective Inspector Blue.
Been promoted since.
I have been promoted, yeah, a few times actually. And, after that, we exchanged pleasantries, I suppose you could say, and we put all the allegations to him once again. Could you have had intercourse with somebody on the back seat of that taxi?
On that day, I have no idea.
About that time?
No, I don't remember.
Have you ever masturbated in the back seat of your taxi? The taxi that you had in 1980?
I don't recall.
Could you have done?
Possibly, I don't know. It's a long time ago, I've got no idea.
No, but I mean, you would know. I mean, I think most people would know whether they've masturbated in the car or not.
Oh, I really can't remember.
Did you assault Amanda Carter?
No, I didn't.
Did you kill Amanda Carter?
No, I didn't.
The forensic evidence was then put forward.
Forensic tests indicate that the stain contained a mixture of both sperm and vaginal fluid. Those tests indicate also that part of the stain is consistent with what we call the DNA profile of Amanda Carter. Can you offer any explanation for that?
No, I can't.
Are you quite sure that on no occasion that you had sex with Amanda Carter on the back seat of your taxi?
Positive.
Would you be prepared to provide a sample of your blood for scientific analysis?
I had the same question 10 years ago and I was told not to give it then, so I don't see why I should now. I don't know. I'd have to see a lawyer before I do anything about it.
Is there anything else, Mr. Hyland, that you want to say about this particular investigation?
I've just about had enough of it. You haven't let up on me. As I said then, you hounded me. Looks like you're going to do it again. I had nothing to do with her going missing or a disappearance or a death or anything else. I understand the position you're in too, but I don't know why you've got to pick on me.
I think he was conscious then that the investigation was ongoing. I suppose he thought after going to 2 different states and 13 years down the track, he was a free man. He thought that the police wouldn't chase him anymore and he'd got far enough away, but the fact is he hadn't. At the end of the day, we charged him and we extradited him back to Tasmania. I rang Don Carter and I told him that the family were very relieved that finally, after all those years, that he'd been charged.
Once arrested, police finally had the authority to take a sample of Wayne Hyland's blood, and there was no surprise. His DNA fingerprint was clearly seen in the compound stain from the back seat of his taxi.
Gerald Wayne Hyland has pleaded not guilty to the murder of Amanda Carter on or about July 27, 1980. Crown Prosecutor Damien Bugg told the jury his case would involve evidence based on DNA testing far advanced to the forensic tests available at the time of the original investigations.
The trial proper began this week, but today it took an unexpected twist.
About 3 days into the trial, Damien Bugg rang me at home. I think his words were, "You've got him, mate, you finally got him." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Look, this is the situation. They've approached me and they're offering to plead guilty to manslaughter."
The murder charge was then read out again, and after hearing it, Hyland said, "I'm not guilty of murder, but I am guilty of manslaughter." The Director of Public Prosecutions, Damien Bugg, told the court Hyland tried to undress Miss Carter in the back of his taxi while she was dozing off.
The facts for the prosecution were that Hyland had been working that night in his cab, that he'd gone to the CML cab stand. Amanda Carter was on the steps, that she probably got in the taxi and fell asleep. He got out of the taxi and picked up the handbag that was still sitting there where she was. He drove to North Hobart, and that's when he was seen by the other taxi drivers at the service station in North Hobart.
Piss off!
He then continued on out to Bridgewater, and he went to Riverside Drive. He then had sexual intercourse with her against her will. In other words, she was raped on the back seat of that taxi. After he committed the crime, he then tried to strangle Amanda Carter and may well have held her head underwater. And as a result of his acts, she died of drowning. And they pleaded guilty of those facts.
Wayne Highland was sentenced to 6 years for rape and 10 years for manslaughter.
A detective, when he becomes involved in a case which is so very personal as this one was, it becomes a part of you. And it was extremely satisfying that we had our man.
I've only spoken briefly to Mrs. Carter. Obviously, she's very relieved. She indicated she didn't want to speak to the media, but I'm sure the family are greatly relieved now that's all over and done with. Tragically, Don Carter died just before the trial, and he never got to know that Highland was convicted of the crime. So that was very sad. But for those of us that were there and were still working, it was a very satisfying result because we felt we'd honoured our commitment to the family.
But in 2001, 8 years into his 16-year sentence for the rape and manslaughter of 22-year-old Amanda Carter, Gerald Wayne Highland was granted parole.
Now, basically 8 years for a person's life is very poor in the sense of punishment. He's still wandering around right now. Mandy Carter's not.
The sirens were the first thing they remembered. Not the name of the street, not the face of the man on the stretcher, not the exact time stamped on the police report. Just the sirens, slicing through the frozen Chicago night of January 1979 like someone dragging metal down glass. Neighbors would later say they woke with the sense that something had split open in the city, that the wind coming off the lake suddenly felt wrong. It started in a 3-story brick walk-up on the south side, the kind of building that never makes the news until blood hits the hallway. Faded green paint peeling off the stair rails, mailboxes stuck with old flyers, a street lamp outside that flickered more than it shone. In apartment 3B lived a man everyone knew by his first name only, Daniel, 32 years old, night shift line cook, quiet, polite, paid his rent in cash, the kind of man who could live 3 years on your floor and you'd still say, nice guy, keeps to himself because you never really knew anything more. On January 14th, 1979, at 2:11 a.m., someone dialed 911 from the payphone on the corner. The operator logged heavy breathing. A male voice, 4 words. He's not moving. Blood. Click. No name. No answer on callback. Patrol car dispatched. Officers Reyes and Collins arrived 7 minutes later, tires crunching over slush, breath ghosting in front of their faces as they stepped out. 3rd floor, door 3B, unlocked. Inside, the apartment was small, neat, almost too neat. Couch, armchair, low coffee table lined with yesterday's Tribune, ashtray with a single cigarette burned out to the filter, kitchen sink empty, fridge humming, bedroom door half open, as if someone had gone in and never come out. Reyes nudged it with the back of his hand, gun drawn, heart pounding to a rhythm he would still hear in his sleep years later. Daniel lay on the floor between the bed and the dresser, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, one hand frozen mid-reach as if he'd tried to grab hold of something that wasn't there. There was blood, but not as much as you'd expect, a single stab wound, clean and deep between the ribs, no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no smashed lamp, no defensive wounds on the hands. Whoever had come into that bedroom had not needed to fight. They had walked in, stepped close, and done what they came to do, while Daniel was standing still, maybe even talking, maybe even trusting. The crime scene techs moved in under buzzing fluorescent lights, Polaroids popped, measuring tapes snapped open and shut, powder dusted across doorknobs and picture frames and the metal edge of the window. Outside, neighbors gathered on the stairwell in bathrobes and boots, whispering, straining to see past the uniforms and yellow tape, trying to decide if what they were feeling was fear, curiosity, or relief that it wasn't their door standing open. Detectives were called in before dawn. Lid. Detective Frank Marlowe, 20 years on the force, coat that smelled like stale coffee and cold rain, eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. He stepped into 3B with the weary authority of a man who had seen every way a life can end in this city. But even he paused for a split second at the sight of Daniel on the floor, the angle of the body, the almost ceremonial stillness of the room. Something about it felt staged, like a photograph carefully composed, a message maybe, or a performance. They bagged a knife from the kitchen drawer, wiped clean but still slightly damp, as if it had been washed in a hurry. They bagged a rumpled receipt from a late-night diner 4 blocks away, time-stamped 1:02 a.m. 2 coffees, 1 burger, 1 slice of pie. No name, just the imprint of a cash register and the ghost of a conversation that no one would admit to hearing. They bagged a crumpled matchbook from a bar on the north side, far from Daniel's usual orbit, logo half scratched off. And slipping out from under the bed, barely visible until the crime scene light caught it, they found something else. A photograph. It was small, black and white, the kind you get from a cheap photo booth. 2 people crammed into the frame. Daniel on the left, younger, hair a little longer, mouth open in mid-laugh. On the right, someone else. The second face was scratched out, not with a pen, not with a tear, but with something sharper, slower, angrier. Every line carved with precision until all that remained was a blur of white gashes where eyes should have been. On the back, in blue ink, a date. Summer 76. And beneath it, in handwriting that pressed hard enough to groove the paper, you promised. Marlowe turned the photo in his hand, the weight of it out of proportion to its size. Victim with an unknown companion. A promise broken. Someone angry enough to erase a face, but careful enough to leave the rest intact. He felt the first thread of the case tightening around his ribs. He did what detectives do. He started asking questions. Who was Daniel, really? Why did he keep to himself? Why did he have a matchbook from a bar across town and a photo taken 3 years earlier with someone he clearly didn't want to forget, even after he'd tried to erase them? Co-workers at the diner where he worked nights said he was reliable, quiet, sometimes stayed late to help clean up. One waitress remembered a man who used to sit at the counter, always at the same stool, always leaving right after Daniel's shift ended. Dark hair, leather jacket, no one knew his name. Neighbors remembered a few late-night visitors to 3B. A woman with red gloves. A man with a limp. A teenager with a loud laugh who'd smoke on the fire escape. Faces blurred by time. Descriptions conflicting. Details slipping away even as they were written down. The building had too many people coming and going. Too many doors opening and closing at all hours. Too many secrets stacked on top of each other like floors. For the first 48 hours, the case moved fast. Patrol canvassed the blocks. Detectives hit the usual bars, the diners, the daytime haunts of night shift workers. They ran Daniel's name through every database they had. No priors, no debts on record, no known enemies, no family in the city, at least none that anyone could find. Just a sister in Indiana who hadn't spoken to him in 5 years, and a mother whose address bounced back as undeliverable. The more they dug, the more it felt like the victim had been slowly erasing himself long before someone finished the job. Then came the call that tightened the noose. A bartender on the north side recognized the matchbook logo, the rust lantern. Low light, loud jukebox. Yes, he remembered Daniel. Came in a handful of times the year before, always with the same guy. Dark hair, leather jacket, quiet until he wasn't. Arguments at the back table, hands slamming down on wood. One night the bartender heard a fragment. "You don't walk away from this, Danny. Not from me." He pretended not to hear the rest. The detectives pulled photos from Vice, ran mugshots past the bartender, past the waitress, past Mrs. Henderson, who watched too much out her peephole for her own good. And suddenly, there it was, a name. Victor Kane, 34, petty record. Bar fights, small-time dealing, nothing that stuck. Lived on and off near the river, known to drift, known to charm, known to flare up like gasoline. The bartender pointed at his photo without hesitation. "That's him. That's the guy with your dead cook." Now the story had shape. Victim, possible lover, possible partner, possible threat. Promises made in the heat of summer 76 written on the back of a photo. Promises broken in the dead of winter 79 with a single precise stab to the ribs. It made sense. Too much sense. Almost like a script. They hunted for Victor, old addresses, old girlfriends, old cellmates. A man like that leaves impressions, debts, grudges. But he also learns how to vanish. Days slipped into weeks. Tips came in and burned out. There was talk of a man answering his description hopping a freight train out of the city. There was talk of him being seen at a bus station with a duffel bag and a haunted look. For every sighting, there was a denial. For every rumor, a dead end. As winter bled into a gray Chicago spring, the sirens moved on to other scenes. But the echo of that first night stayed with Marlowe. The department was already starting to talk about the case like it was finished. But when he looked at the photos laid out on his desk at the end of another 14-hour day, when he studied Daniel's open eyes and the blurred white gashes where another man's face should have been, he felt it like a chill under his skin. Something about this was wrong, too clean, too convenient, too eager to close. Somewhere between the washed knife in the drawer, the anonymous 911 call from the payphone, and the promise carved into the back of that photo, the real story was hiding, watching, waiting for the moment when Chicago would realize that what everyone was so ready to call solved was already starting to go cold. For a few weeks, they pretended it was just another homicide file. A man dead in his own bedroom, probable suspect with a record, jealous rage, end of story. The paperwork moved through the building like it always did, from desk to desk, ink drying over details that were already beginning to blur. Victim, Daniel Hayes. That was his last name, discovered through an old Social Security card wedged in the back of a drawer, the edges worn so soft it looked touched more often in memory than in use. Possible suspect, Victor Kane, question marks turning into periods with every report that mentioned his name. But underneath the official lines, the rumor mill ran hot. Cops at coffee stands muttering that it was one of those cases. The ones that feel simple, that everyone wants to be simple, because the alternative is admitting that someone walked into a man's home, killed him clean, and walked back out into the city like a shadow. People like that don't follow rules. They don't stay put. They don't leave easy answers. They haunt. The media gave it one day. Southside man found slain in apartment. A few paragraphs, no photo. Just a block of text wedged between stories about a warehouse fire and a local election. No one wrote about the scratched-out face in the photo or the promise etched on the back. That detail stayed in the file room, sealed in plastic, sliding into a cabinet that smelled like dust and old coffee. The public forgot the name. The detectives didn't, not the ones who'd seen the look on Daniel's face up close. Marlowe kept the photo on his desk longer than he should have. He'd turn it over between calls, thumb brushing the words "you promised," like he could feel the pressure of the original hand that wrote it. He tried to picture the moment it was scribbled, a booth in some bar, a cheap pen, someone furious, someone pleading. He tried to imagine Daniel's voice. Was he the one who promised or the one demanding it? The past never answered, it just stared back in black and white. They got their first break 3 months in. Spring creeping in, snow gone, but the chill still clinging to the city's bones. A patrol unit rolled a drunk off a sidewalk near the Rust Lantern. Mid-40s, jacket 2 sizes too big. Hands twitching, eyes darting in all directions like he was afraid of something no one else could see. At booking, he started rambling about knowing things, knowing people, knowing what happened to that cook from the South Side. The word traveled fast, drunk and holding, talking about Daniel. Marlowe went down himself, tie loosened, patience hanging by a thread. They sat across from each other in a small interview room that smelled like bleach and fear. The man said his name was Eddie. He claimed he'd seen Victor the week after the killing, claimed he'd shared a cigarette with him behind the bar, claimed Victor had said the kind of thing that sticks in your brain like glass. Had to take care of something. He should have kept his mouth shut. On paper it was gold. Witness places, suspect in the city, time frame close, words hinting at motive. The assistant state's attorney even showed up, already outlining the skeleton of a case. But when they pressed Eddie, dates, times, who else was there? His story bent, shifted, slid sideways like a building with a bad foundation. Sometimes it was snowing, sometimes it wasn't, sometimes Victor had a beard, sometimes he didn't, sometimes the bar was full, sometimes they were alone. Then he asked for a lawyer, then he asked for a drink, then he asked if they could help him out in exchange for helping them out. And just like that, the gold turned to rust, unreliable, tainted. A man desperate for a break is not a man you stake a homicide charge on. The state's attorney left with a pinched look. The pressure that had been building in the station air didn't break. It thickened. So they did what cops do when a case won't go where it's supposed to. They dug sideways, not just into the victim's life, but the cracks around it. Old addresses, old jobs, old acquaintances who didn't want to be called friends. In a cramped studio on the north side, they found a woman who recognized Daniel's photo but refused to say how. She shut her door with the chain still on and muttered, "He said he was done. He said he was out," through the gap before cutting them off with a slam. Out of what? Marlowe wrote that question in the margin of his notes and circled it, underlined it twice. The kind of emphasis that means this goes deeper, maybe organized, maybe informal, maybe just a tight little circle of people who believed the rules didn't apply to them as long as they stayed quiet and far from the daylight. 2 weeks later, they got their second break. A phone call to the homicide desk, woman's voice low and careful, refusing to give a name. "You're looking at the wrong man," she said. "It wasn't Victor." Click. Nothing on callback. The number traced to another payphone, this one on the other side of the city, in a neighborhood that had no obvious connection to Daniel, to Victor, to the rust lantern, to any of it. Another ghost talking through static, another thread that snapped as soon as they grabbed it. The more noise they made, the more the case seemed to recede. Like something slipping under dark water, a few detectives started referring to it as the ghost case in the break room. Not a joke, not really, more like a warning. This is what happens when you chase the wrong shadow for too long. The department was under pressure. They needed numbers, cleared cases, wins they could point to when the next budget hearing rolled around. A cook with no family, a suspect with a record who'd conveniently disappeared. That was a story everyone could live with. By the end of the year, the file was shifted. Not closed, not officially, just moved, off the active stack, onto a shelf with other folders whose tabs were starting to fade. The stamp went down in heavy red ink. Inactive, pending new leads. The most polite way the system has of saying, don't hold your breath. In the quiet of the records room, under humming fluorescent lights, the Chicago winter of '79 turned into history. But cities remember in strange ways, not in headlines, not in public monuments, but in the small habits of those who were too close to forget. The waitress at the diner still flinched when a man in a leather jacket sat at the counter. Mrs. Henderson still paused at her peephole some nights, listening for footsteps on the stairs that matched a rhythm she heard the night of the murder. The bartender at the Rust Lantern started closing up a little earlier, telling himself it was about cutting costs, not about the way the back corner booth felt cursed. And Marlowe, by then sliding deeper into his third decade on the job, would sometimes open the file when the station went quiet near midnight. He'd pull out the photo first, always the photo. He'd stare at Daniel's laughing face, at the mutilated whiteness where the other man's features should be, at the words on the back. You promised. He'd try, again and again, to put a voice to those letters, a tone, a context. It never came. The flat blue ink of the handwriting refused to give up the sound of the hand that moved. Years slid by. The department changed. New faces, new procedures, new buildings wired with computers that hummed and clicked their way into the future. The old records room got moved twice, files boxed and reboxed, labels rewritten by hands that had never walked through the crime scenes inside. Most cases in those cabinets were truly dead, victims known only as case numbers now, places that had been demolished or gentrified out of recognition. But among them sat one thin folder with a Polaroid that refused to fade as much as it should have. In 1987, a rookie detective on cold case rotation pulled it at random. Training exercise, practice, learn how to read an old scene, feel the gaps, accept the limits. He sat alone at a metal desk and followed the story with his finger. Body in 3B, washed knife, anonymous 911 call, photo, Victor Kane, the failed witness, the anonymous woman who said they were wrong. He pushed back his chair at the end and exhaled, unsettled. It didn't feel finished, he told his supervisor. It felt interfered with. The supervisor shrugged. Welcome to homicide, kid. Half of what you'll touch is going to feel like that. He slapped the folder shut like that was the end of it. But the rookie wasn't the only one feeling something. By then, Marlowe was a few years away from retirement, the gray at his temples worn into the lines on his face. When he heard the old case number mentioned in the same breath as cold case exercise, something inside him tightened. Ghosts don't like being used for drills. He walked over, took the file back without asking. The rookie watched him with the vague resentment of youth being told where the edges are. Marlowe didn't care. There are some things you don't turn into homework. He carried the folder to the window where winter light made the paper look thin enough to tear. For the first time in a long time, he read every line like it was new, every timestamp, every address, every uncertain word in every statement. There, in the middle of all that routine language, the same small mysteries blinked back at him. Why was there no sign of forced entry? Why wash the knife but leave it in the drawer instead of taking it? Why scratch out only one face in the photo when the person doing the scratching could have destroyed the whole thing? Why call 911 at all if you're planning to disappear? The obvious answer was guilt, panic, a sudden rush of conscience, but the obvious answer had been sitting for 8 years and had produced nothing but dust. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was choreography. He found himself back at the address of 3B, now converted into condos, the old green paint replaced with glossy, neutral tones, new intercom, new residents who didn't know they were walking upstairs every night over a ghost. The hallway smelled different, but the shape was the same. Long, narrow, sound carrying in strange ways. He stood where the body had fallen, roughly, by memory and the measurements in the report. He pictured the angle, the reach of Daniel's hand, the point where a knife would need to be to land exactly where it had. He imagined the killer's face inches from the victim's, not rage, not frenzy, something cooler, the kind of calm that allows for one fatal, measured thrust and then the steady walk to the sink, the tap, the wash, the drawer. The kind of calm that allows you to pull a photo from under a bed, slide your thumbnail over a face again and again until it's nothing but scars of paper and then put it back down where you know it will be found, not hiding, displaying. Back at his car, he sat for a long time with the engine off, fingers drumming on the steering wheel. His mind kept circling the same word, staged. Like the scene had been built for them, like someone wanted the story to be told a certain way, wanted the line from Daniel to Victor to be straight, simpler, neater, less messy than whatever reality lay underneath. A victim who'd promised something, a volatile boyfriend with a record, a disappearance, case closed. Except it wasn't. The file itself was proof. Red stamp, cold case rotation, rookie exercises. If it had been solved, truly solved, it would be resting in a different cabinet, one that no one bothered opening anymore. This one still had heat, faint but persistent, like embers under ash. It burned in the edges of Marlowe's thoughts, even when he tried to turn away. He drove home through streets that had changed names over the years, through neighborhoods that wore new faces over old scars. Every time he stopped at a red light, he caught his own reflection in the windshield, the tired eyes of a man who had learned to live with not knowing. But some cases don't let you make peace. They stay. They wait. They coil themselves quietly around the city's timeline, biding their time for the one detail, the one accident, the one slip that will drag them out of the dark. That slip was coming, not tonight, not tomorrow, not in the decade that began with the murder in 3B, but somewhere out there, in a box, in a memory, in a mouth that had stayed shut for too long, something related to Daniel Hayes in the winter of '79 was still alive, still moving, still capable, all these years later, of blowing open the comfortable, clean narrative that everyone had agreed to accept, still capable of turning inactive, pending new leads into 3 words that would stop hearts across the city when they finally appeared in black ink on a fresh report. Case. Reopened. Homicide. It didn't happen with a knock on the door or a dramatic confession in a smoky bar. It started, like most second lives of dead cases, with a memo, 1 page, plain type. New directive from upstairs. Backlog reduction. Cold case initiative. Review unsolved homicides pre-1985 for potential forensic re-examination. It slid across desks in bland manila, landed in trays already drowning, and for most detectives it was just another order to be triaged, postponed, ignored. But paper has a way of finding the right hands. In 1996, Detective Lena Ortiz was 6 years into the job, sharp-eyed, fast-talking, and already fully aware that the city did not care how much sleep she lost over strangers. She was assigned to the new cold case rotation because someone up the chain decided she had a good memory for details, which was bureaucratic code for give the obsessive ones the ghosts. They'll at least pretend to care. She sat at a metal desk in a windowless office, surrounded by towers of old files and humming fluorescent lights that made everyone's skin look a little dead, and she opened the first box from the inactive pending new leads shelf. The file on Daniel Hayes wasn't thicker than her thumb. That was the first thing that bothered her. A man stabbed in his own bedroom, a named suspect, anonymous calls, and less paper than some bar fight homicides she'd seen. She flipped through photographs that smelled faintly of chemicals and age. Hallway, bedroom, body, the washed knife and its evidence marker. The payphone on the corner, captured in the background of one shot like an extra who doesn't know they're about to become a star witness. Then the Polaroid. 2 men in a booth, one face laughing, one face torn to white scars. On the back, Summer 76, you promised. She didn't know Marlowe, not really. By then he was just a name that floated through the building like cigarette smoke, a legend of the old school. Retired to a life of fishing or drinking or both, depending on who you asked. But she recognized his handwriting in the margins of the reports, the angry, tight script notes that bled out from the lines. No forced entry. Anonymous female caller? Scene feels staged. Most detectives didn't write their suspicions in the margins. They kept them in their heads, where they could be forgotten without leaving a trace. Whoever this Marlowe had been, he'd committed his unease to paper. That meant something to Ortiz. It meant she wasn't walking into a dead room. Someone had been there before her, feeling the same chill. She rolled her chair back, stared at the ceiling, listened to the faint hum of the building's ventilation. The 90s were obsessed with closure. Talk shows, self-help books, politicians promising to close chapters, heal wounds, move on. She'd grown up here, in neighborhoods where nobody got closure, just new problems, layered on old ones. A cold case wasn't a story that had ended. It was a fault line running under everything, waiting for the right pressure to make it crack. Somewhere between the washed knife and the scratched-out face, she felt that pressure. The memo about forensic review gave her a lever. The evidence from 79 lived in a climate-controlled room that smelled like plastic and regret. She signed it out, one sealed box with the case number stamped in fading ink. Inside, the knife, still in its labeled tray, a few swabs, the Polaroid in a separate envelope, a small plastic bag with a fingernail clipping that someone had decided to take just in case. Back in 79, just in case didn't go very far. By 96, just in case could be turned into a DNA profile that might talk louder than any witness who'd spent the last 17 years forgetting. She walked the box down the hallway to the new forensic lab, all bright lights and whirring machines, the future bolted onto the side of an old building. The tech on duty, a man in thick glasses who wore his ID badge like a shield, took the form, took the box, and raised an eyebrow at the date. "You digging all the way back there?" he asked. "Cold case review," she replied. "I want everything you can pull. Knife handle, blade, those swabs, the clipping. If there's even half a cell screaming for attention in there, I want to hear it." He smirked, half amused, half pitying. "You know how long this backlog is? We're still chewing through 89. She leaned in, voice dropping, the way cops do when they're not asking. "Log it. Start it. Flag it. I'll bring you coffee until your heart gives out. This one bothers me. That's all you need to know." That was how it started, not with a revelation, but with a stubborn detective pushing old metal into new machines. While the lab moved at its own glacial pace, Ortiz stayed with the paper. She traced Daniel's life like a ghost track: Indiana childhood, Chicago relocation, kitchen shifts, cash pay, no priors, no family knocking on any doors. The line of his existence through the city felt faint, like he'd been trying not to leave a mark. People who try not to leave a mark usually have a reason. She pulled older, deeper records, the kind kept on microfilm and in boxes that hadn't been touched since disco died. There, under a previous address and a different job, she found something the original file only hinted at. 3 years before his death, Daniel had been picked up and released in connection with a gambling operation. No charges, no follow-up, just a name on a list of persons present at the scene. The scene had been a back room behind a bar on the north side, the same neighborhood as the Rust Lantern, the same orbit as Victor Kane. It wasn't proof, but it was a shape, a circle closing. Daniel wasn't just a quiet cook with a mysterious friend. He'd been in the same rooms as people who ran games they didn't want cops to know about. Informal, off-book, the kind of operation that doesn't show up in official reports, only in the way people flinch when you say certain names. Had he been a player, a lookout, a reluctant witness? Had he seen something nobody wanted him to see? She drove out to the address of that old bust. The bar was gone, replaced by a coffee shop with exposed brick and students bent over laptops. The back room was now a storage closet stacked with boxes of branded mugs and extra chairs. No bloodstains, no whispers, just the faint feeling, as she stood there in the smell of espresso and detergent, that the city had pulled another mask over its face. Outside, the street had changed, but the angles were the same. Shadows still collected in the same corners. People still moved with the same hurried, head-down stride after dark. She began tracking down anyone connected to the original investigation who was still breathing. One of the arresting officers had moved to Florida and grown soft around the middle. He remembered the bust in vague terms, but not Daniel's face. "Lots of kids in those rooms," he said over the phone, TV noise blaring in the background. "Most of them just there to drink and pretend they were dangerous. We were more interested in the guys running the tables." "Hayes? Sure, the name's familiar. He kept his mouth shut. That's probably why I don't remember him better." The bartender from the Rust Lantern had died of a heart attack in '89. The waitress from Daniel's Diner had moved out of state, left no forwarding address. Mrs. Henderson in the old building on the south side was gone. Apartment now occupied by a young couple with a baby who blinked at Ortiz with the wide, uncomprehending stare of someone brand new to a city full of old crimes. It was like chasing echoes through a tunnel. Every voice she almost caught dissolved when she turned her head. 2 months after she'd signed the evidence out, the lab called. The tech's voice was flat, practiced, a thin layer of professional distance over something taut underneath. "We got something on your 79 special." Ortiz's pulse jumped. "Talk to me." "Knife handle. We pulled 2 profiles. Strong one is your victim, matches the blood and the clipping. The other one's partial, not enough for a full ID, but enough for a search. Ran it through CODIS." "And?" "Nothing. No hit. Whoever held that knife has never been arrested, never been printed, or they're in a jurisdiction that hasn't dumped their stuff into the system yet." She pressed the phone harder to her ear, as if she could wring more out of his silence. "Male? Female?" "Can't say. Low quantity, but it's not a mix of a dozen people. It's clean. Someone else handled that knife after the wash. Not just grabbed the drawer or brushed by. Handled. Grip points line up with a right-handed hold." "Could it still be this suspect of record?" she asked, voice sharpening around the name that had been waiting at the back of her throat. Victor Kane. Only if Victor Kane has never left a print in any jurisdiction that reports to the national system, which, from what you wrote in your request, sounds unlikely. We'll keep it flagged. If a match ever pops, you'll get a notice. She hung up and stared at the wall. This was the kind of answer that wasn't an answer at all. They'd proven what she already felt in her bones. Another presence in that apartment, another hand on the knife. But it was a ghost, technically perfect and practically useless. No face attached, no name, no address she could knock on at 3 a.m. She went back to the file, to the anonymous 911 call that had started it all. 4 words. He's not moving. Blood. She requested the original recording, if it still existed. A clerk dug through cabinets and emerged with a dusty reel-to-reel tape in a cardboard box stamped with dates and numbers from a decade most people wanted to forget. The audio unit had to find an old machine just to play it. When they did, the sound came through warped and crackling like the voice was already half buried. She stood in the dim booth, headphones on, while the technician spooled it up. Static, a click, a breath, harsh like it was being dragged past clenched teeth. Then the words, distorted but clear enough. He's not moving. Blood. The operator's rehearsed response. Sir, what's your location? Another breath, the faint echo of something in the background. Traffic, a door closing, a distant siren, impossible to parse. Then the click of disconnection, end of tape. Can you clean it? She asked. We can try, the tech said. Might be able to pull the background up a little. Maybe isolate the voice more. But it's old. Don't expect miracles. She listened to it 5, 6, 7 times. The more she played it, the more one thing bothered her. It wasn't the words. It was the way the man said them. There was no panic, no wobble. It wasn't the frantic, stumbling rush she'd heard from 100 calls where someone had just found a body and their reality had smashed open. The cadence was steady, controlled, like someone reading from a line, like someone performing concern rather than drowning in it. She walked back through the timeline. The call logged at 2:11 a.m., officers arriving at 2:18, neighbors interviewed saying they heard footsteps in the hall sometime after 2, but nobody certain enough to swear to a minute. What if the call had not been the first reaction to discovery, but the last step of a plan? What if the killer had stepped out, crossed to the payphone, delivered their line, and walked away knowing they'd built a narrative the city would swallow? When the cleaned-up version of the tape came back a week later, the tech handed her a cassette and a shrug. Best we can do, he said. We pulled down the hiss, boosted the mid-range. There's something weird on the back end, but I can't isolate it cleanly. She took it back to her desk, closed the door, pressed play. The voice was clearer now, less drowned in static. Still male, mid-range, flattened by the technology of the time. But under the final breath, before the hang-up, she heard it. A sound that hadn't registered before. A faint, high-pitched tone, not a siren, not traffic. Something electronic, clipped, almost like she rewound, listened again. A beep, short, sharp, familiar. She'd heard that sound every day for years, the tone of a digital wristwatch ticking past a set alarm. In 1979, not everyone wore one. They were new, flashy, a little expensive, the kind of thing you notice on a wrist, especially if the man wearing it leans on your counter at 2 a.m. at the end of every shift. Ortiz dug back through the interviews, through the thin descriptions Mrs. Henderson and the waitress had given of the mysterious friend. Dark hair, leather jacket, always checked his watch, a throwaway line in one statement barely noted. He kept looking at his watch, like he was late. She scribbled in the margin, caller had digital watch? Then under it, the same word Marlowe had once pressed into paper years earlier without ever knowing she'd see it, staged. The more she pulled, the more the old narrative creaked. If Victor had killed Daniel in a fit of jealous rage, why wash the knife and put it back? Why scratch out his own face in the photo but leave it behind? Why make the 911 call at all, controlled voice and all, instead of disappearing into a city that's very good at forgetting men like him? Unless it wasn't Victor at the payphone, unless someone wanted them all to think it was. She requested any trace of Victor Kane in systems newer than the paper era. Driver's licenses, credit records, death certificates, nothing. It was like his name had sunk beneath the surface of the data lake. Either he was dead and buried under a wrong name, or he had never been who they thought he was in the first place. An alias? A ghost story the neighborhood told itself to explain sudden violence. The lab's partial profile sat in a database, silent, waiting for a match that might never come. The tape sat in an evidence locker with a fresh label, and on Ortiz's desk, the Polaroid lay under a desk lamp, the scratched-out face looking more like a mask with every passing day. She flipped it over again, traced the groove of the words "you promised" with her nail, and felt a new question rising, louder than all the others. What do you promise a man that makes someone erase your existence from a photo and your heartbeat from a bedroom on a winter night? Chicago moved around her, cars and trains and lives surging forward, indifferent, in the basement of the police building, old air whispered through stacks of cold cases. Some of them would never stir again. But this one was awake now, fully, grinding its teeth. The city had thought it could file it away as just another solved mystery, another neat line from victim to suspect. The new evidence said otherwise. The knife, the tape, the missing man, the stage concern. A cold case had just turned colder, sharper, stranger, refusing again to stay buried where it had been shoved. And somewhere out there, someone who had once checked his digital watch at 2 a.m. might have felt, without knowing why, a sudden shift in the air, like an old secret starting to move. The thing about ghosts is, once you start talking to them, you can't always choose which ones answer. Ortiz learned that in the most old-fashioned way possible, a phone call from a number with no ID, crackling like it had been dragged through 20 years of dust. It came on a Tuesday just after midnight when the building had gone quiet and the vending machine down the hall was the loudest thing on the floor. She picked up expecting a drunk, a missed dial, another wrong number from a city that never sleeps properly. Instead, she got 3 seconds of silence and a voice that sounded like gravel being poured out of a paper bag. "You're digging into Hayes," the man said. "No hello." "No name, just the case." She straightened in her chair, eyes flicking to the file on her desk. "Who's this?" A faint exhale, half laugh, half sigh. "Thought they'd let that one rot. Guess I was wrong." "Who is this?" she repeated, sharper. "Someone who's tired," he said. "Tired of thinking about a dead kid in 3B every time I close my eyes." "You Ortiz?" Her hand tightened around the receiver. Nobody outside the building should have known her name in connection with this case yet. "Yeah." "Good," the man said. "Means they gave it to someone who still gives a damn. Name's Marlowe." The name hit like a dropped file cabinet. She pictured the handwriting in the margins, the old notes, the weight of suspicion pressed into paper. "You're retired, yeah. Don't worry, I'm not calling to tell you how to do your job. You pulled the file, you saw the mess. I just want to know one thing." There was a pause, like he was swallowing something heavy. "You get anything new?" She told him about the knife, the partial DNA profile, the nothing in CODIS, the digital watch beep on the tape. She kept her voice neutral, factual, but she could hear something shifting on the other end of the line, like furniture being moved in an old house. When she mentioned the wristwatch alarm, he cut in for the first time. "Wait, you sure?" I listened to it myself, cleaned version, end of the call, one short beep, not from dispatch, from him. He was quiet for a long moment. She almost thought the line had dropped. Then, he wore one, the friend, the one at the diner. Stainless band, black face, little green backlight. I remember because the waitress joked about it once, called him Mr. Future. You saying the caller had one of those on his wrist makes my stomach turn. "Because it sounds like him?" "No," Marlowe said, "because I never heard that tape in '79. Would have pushed that angle hard if I had, which means someone, somewhere decided I didn't need to hear it." The words sat between them like a loaded gun. Someone decided, not lost, not misplaced, decided. Bureaucratic gravity is powerful, but it rarely acts on a single tape. Someone had touched this case somewhere above his pay grade and nudged it in a direction. "Why didn't you?" Ortiz asked quietly. "Hear it, I mean." "Different times," he said bitterly. "Call center ops didn't preserve everything. Homicide didn't get every reel unless it seemed important. The watch thing wouldn't have meant much to anyone who hadn't stood in that diner at 2 a.m. I was supposed to get a copy. It never showed up. I yelled. They shrugged. Technical issues, they said. I let it go. That's on me." She felt the weight of that admission, the regret baked into it. The city ate men like him alive and then told them they should have chewed faster. "Why call now?" she asked. "You walked away from this 8 years ago." "Walked?" He gave a low, humorless chuckle. "Kid, I may have left the building, but this damn case has been sitting in my living room every night since. I heard about your cold case initiative. Figured some old ghosts might get jostled. When the guy in records called to ask if I'd mind them pulling my notes for a training exercise, I got nosy. They let slip your name. That you'd checked out Hayes. I took a wild guess on the main line, asked for cold case. You picked up. Guess that's fate or punishment. Take your pick." She hesitated, then did something most cops wouldn't. She opened the door wider. "What do you remember that isn't in the file?" He didn't need to be asked twice. The words poured out, rusty at first, then faster, like a pipe shaking loose scale that's been building for years. The way the apartment had felt too clean. The unexplained gap between when some neighbors claimed to hear footsteps and when the call was logged. The phone company records that had mysteriously gone missing when he tried to pull every outgoing call from that payphone for the week. The unsigned note that had appeared in his in-tray one morning, no envelope, just a scrap of paper with a name on it, Kane, and a question mark. No one he knew owned that handwriting. "You think Victor was a ghost," Ortiz said. "A decoy, a story someone fed you." "I think..." Marlowe exhaled slowly. "I think there were at least 3 men in that story, and we only ever named 2. Hayes, Kane, and the third one, the one with the calm voice and the clean hands, he's the one who scares me." 3 men, victim, ghost suspect, real killer, the geometry locked into place in her mind like bars slamming shut. You ever look at connected cases, she asked? Other stabbings, other washed weapons, other anonymous calls. Back then, we barely had the time to look at the bodies in front of us, let alone ghosts in other districts, he said. We asked around, nothing obvious, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there. I always had this sense. He trailed off. Say it, she pushed. That we'd walked into the middle of someone else's play, that Hayes wasn't the opening act, he was a scene change. After the call, she sat alone in the glow of her desk lamp as the building creaked around her. The idea of a third man had been circling her brain already, in the DNA, in the gaps. But hearing it from the original lead detective, hearing the old fear still alive in his voice, that made it real in a way the paper couldn't. She didn't sleep much that week. She dove into the archives with a ferocity that scared even her. She pulled every homicide from late 78 to early 80 with a similar pattern. Indoor scenes, single stab wounds, clean entries, minimal struggle, evidence of post-crime washing or rearranging, anonymous calls from payphones. It was a long list at first. Chicago has never been short on ways to die. But as she stripped away domestic disputes, bar brawls, robberies gone loud, the list shrank to something sharp and frightening. 3 cases, all within a 13-month window, different neighborhoods, different victims, same eerie fingerprints of behavior. Case 1, December 78. Man in his 40s, found in his kitchen, 1 stab to the torso, knife washed and placed carefully on the counter, handle pointing toward the sink. Anonymous call from anonymous male, payphone 2 blocks away. Man down, lot of blood. Caller hangs up, no suspect named, file marked inactive after 6 months. Victim had vague ties to illegal card games. Case 2, March 79. Woman, late 20s, studio apartment on the west side. Single, precise stab wound, no signs of forced entry, jewelry untouched, purse untouched, kitchen knife missing entirely. Anonymous call, male, from payphone outside a liquor store. Think someone's hurt in 4D. Calm voice, hung up before dispatcher could ask more. Case never solved. File noted possible acquaintance homicide. Victim's neighbor mentioned a quiet guy she sometimes had over. No name. Case 3, Hayes. January 79, South Side, clean stab, washed knife, anonymous call. Suspect conveniently supplied by rumor, Victor Kane. She laid the 3 files side by side, the photos forming a grim triptych. Different rooms, different bodies, same cold choreography. She wrote 1 word across all 3 case numbers on a legal pad, capital letters, underlined, pattern, serial killer. The phrase was toxic in a police department. It drew headlines, budget cuts, federal eyes. It suggested failure on a systemic level, that the city had let a predator walk freely for over a year, maybe longer. No one wanted to hear it. No one wanted to say it. But her job wasn't to make the city comfortable. Her job was to listen when the dead started rhyming. She needed more than gut. She needed something that could survive a room full of skeptical bosses and nervous attorneys. So she called the lab again, asked them to pull anything that remained from the other 2 cases, if it hadn't been destroyed, misplaced, eaten by time. There was a long silence on the other end before the tech said, "You're not going to like this." The December 78 evidence was gone, destroyed in a purge years earlier when storage ran out. A memo had been signed, boxes had been cleared, and with them any chance of pulling modern DNA off old metal. The March 79 box had fared slightly better. The knife had never been recovered, but there were swabs. Door handles, sink, a glass on the counter. Someone had had the foresight to keep them in a back corner of storage. Maybe they'd forgotten. Maybe they'd hoped. "We can run them," the tech said. "No promises." No promises. The words dug into her like a hook. She thought of the Polaroid, of the back, of the angry blue ink. You promised. There was something obscene about relying on hope in a system that prided itself on procedure, but that's what cold cases ran on, hope and stubbornness and the occasional miracle. While the lab did its slow, careful magic, she prepared for war. She typed up a summary memo, attached scans of the 3 case reports, highlighted the repeating details. She included the note about the digital watch, the missing phone records, the unsigned Kane scrap. She didn't use the words serial killer in the memo. Instead, she used phrases like behavioral consistency and potential linked offender, language that might slide under radar long enough to be heard. When she presented it to her lieutenant, he read it twice, jaw shifting, eyes narrowing at certain underlined phrases. "This is thin," he said finally. "It's a pattern," she countered. "It's 3 dead citizens in a city that averages 500 homicides a year. You start connecting too many dots, you'll see shapes everywhere. With respect, sir, I'm not chasing clouds. Look at the entry wounds, the lack of struggle, the washed surfaces, the anonymous calls, the calm voice." She tapped each photo in turn, fingers steady though her heart was racing. Different victims, different burrows, same hand, same habit. That's not random. That's practiced. He leaned back, chair creaking. Let's say, for argument's sake, you're right. What do you want? Resources, task force. We don't have it. The city wants fresh numbers, new cases solved, not old ones reopened to make everyone look bad. I want permission to keep pulling, she said. Access. Time. I'm not asking for a task force. I'm asking you not to tell me to put this back in the box. He watched her for a long, measuring moment. Something in her face must have convinced him, or maybe he had his own ghosts he didn't talk about. Finally, he sighed. Fine. Don't let it eat everything else. And if this blows up, I never saw that memo. That was as close to a blessing as she was going to get. She walked out of his office with the strange, electric feeling of someone who's just been allowed to keep lighting matches in a dry room. The lab called 3 days later. When she saw the extension, her hand went cold. Tell me you got something, she said, skipping hello. We pulled partials from the March 79 swabs, the tech said. Mixed profiles, victim plus one, maybe 2 unknowns. But one of the unknowns lines up. With who? She demanded, though she already knew the answer. With your 79 knife handle partial, he said. Not full matches, but overlapping loci, strong enough to say it's likely the same person touched both the victim's door handle and Hayes' knife. Whoever your mystery friend is, he paid at least 2 visits. Different neighborhood, same city, same time frame. Her body flooded with a cold that felt like relief and fear tangled together. Send me the report, she said, and flag both cases as linked in the system. I already did, he replied. Once in a career, right? Enjoy your boogeyman. She hung up and stared at the wall, heartbeat loud in her ears. It was there now, in black and white. Not her imagination, not some old detective's guilt. A real thread, stretched between 2 crime scenes 17 years apart in memory but only months apart in time. The third man, the calm voice, the watch. In her next call with Marlowe, she told him. She heard his breath hitch on the line. So I was right, he said softly. Not just my case, he had others. At least one we can prove, she said. Maybe more we can't. Maybe more we never even found, he added. You don't get that kind of control on your first try. Men like that practice, they escalate. She thought of the city in 78 and 79, the snow, the dim yellow of streetlights on brick, the endless anonymous stairwells. If he's still alive, she said, he's older now. He's made mistakes. At some point, a print, a swab, a cigarette butt ended up where it shouldn't. We just haven't hit it yet. And if he's not alive, Marlowe asked. Then I still want his name, she said. The dead deserve that much. Hayes deserves that much. For a moment, neither of them spoke. 2 detectives from different decades, joined by a straight line of blood across time. Outside her window, the city thrummed its usual indifferent rhythm. Cars, sirens, laughs from a bar across the way, lives spinning obliviously over the cold, hard facts deep below. Keep going, Ortiz, Marlowe said finally. You're closer than I ever got. Just remember, someone once wanted this to look clean. People who tidy up murders don't always like it when you drag their mess back into the light. She hung up and turned back to the photos. 3 bodies, 1 pattern, a partial DNA profile with no name attached, sitting in a system that would keep watching, waiting, ready to light up the moment it recognized its missing twin. The case file label still read inactive, pending new leads, but the words felt wrong now. This wasn't inactive, it was coiled, it was waiting. In 1979, a man had stood in a bedroom, wiped a knife, and walked calmly to a payphone to perform concern for a city that barely noticed. In 1996, the city was finally, belatedly, starting to look back. The cold case that everyone had wanted to call solved was stirring, cracking its knuckles, preparing to step into a new era with sharper tools and less patience for lies. Somewhere, the third man's past was catching up to him, molecule by molecule, decision by decision. All it would take was one more hit in the system, one more careless moment, one more forgotten cigarette flicked into the wrong alley to turn an old, anonymous evil into a name. And when that happened, Chicago wouldn't just be reopening a file. It would be rewriting the story it had been telling itself since the winter of 79. By the time summer rolled into the city, the Hayes file had stopped feeling like paper and started feeling like a pulse. Ortiz carried it everywhere, under her arm, in her bag, balanced on the corner of her desk like a weight she refused to put down. The more she dug, the more it stopped being a single crime scene and started spreading, like ink dropped in water, touching things it was never supposed to touch. Patterns don't live in isolation. They crawl into other stories. Old property crimes, suspicious fires, people who just moved away and were never seen again. Ortiz learned that fast. Every week she'd pull another stack of reports from 78 and 79, anything with echoes. Anonymous calls, unnervingly clean scenes, neighbors who heard footsteps but never saw faces. Most of them fell apart under scrutiny. Wrong weapon, wrong timeline, too much chaos, too little precision. But a few made the hair crawl on the back of her neck. One stuck, a robbery that wasn't from April 79, File written off as a home invasion gone sideways. Man in his 30s, found dead in his living room, front door locked from the inside, wallet and watch still on him. Cause of death, 1 stab wound, low, angled, just under the ribs. Knife never found. Anonymous call from a payphone 4 blocks away. You should check on the guy in 2A. Calm voice. Hangs up. Case file thin, no solid suspects. Stamped inactive before the ink on the autopsy report had fully dried. She sat with that one for a long time. 4 bodies now, if she was right. 4 calls, 4 neat scenes. She mapped them on a city grid, dates and locations pinned under pushpins, red string marking time. December 78, January 79, March 79, April 79. Different corners of the city, but when she traced their positions with her finger, a lazy arc emerged, a slow sweep across Chicago like someone walking in a wide, patient curve. She could hear Marlowe's voice in her head. Men like that practice. They escalate. In the late 90s, the buzzword was profiling, behavioral science. Experts flown in from Quantico with charts and jargon and graphs that looked like heart monitors. Ortiz didn't worship at that altar. She'd seen too many local detectives blame an unsub when the suspect was right in front of them, but she also wasn't arrogant enough to ignore tools. She packaged the 4 cases into a slim, ugly bundle and sent them upstairs, asking quietly, carefully, if behavioral could take a look. It took weeks. When the report came back, it was 6 pages of clinical language and probability charts, but she skipped straight to the parts that mattered. Offender likely male. Comfort with entering private residences without forced entry. Likely familiarity with victims or with social circles that intersected theirs. Above average intelligence, high need for control, ritualized behavior. Post-crime, washing, staging, anonymous notification. May derive gratification from directing investigative narrative. Possible ties to informal criminal economies, gambling, off-book loans, backroom deals, without being fully embedded in traditional organized crime structures. One line sat in the middle of the report like a nail. Offender demonstrates strong capacity to mimic concern and normalcy. May be perceived by acquaintances as helpful, the guy who's always around when something goes wrong, or good in a crisis. The guy who always shows up after the bad thing happens. The one at the bar who helps mop up after a fight. The one in the building who calls the ambulance and says, I just found him like this. The one you never think to suspect because he's there, because he acts like he cares. She read that line 3 times and thought of the anonymous calls, the steady voice, the digital watch beep, not a panicked stranger stumbling on a body, someone who had built that moment into the plan. Her days filled with dead voices and old addresses. Her nights filled with the low buzz of the city through her apartment window, and the silent accusation of photos spread on her kitchen table. Hayes, the March woman, the December man, the April victim. 4 pairs of eyes that would never blink again. Cold cases are supposed to be about science and patience, but they're also about politics, about who gets to keep pulling and who gets told to stop. The first pushback came from inside. You're turning this into a crusade, one of her colleagues said in the break room, coffee steaming between them. We've got live bodies stacking up, families who remember birthdays, not just case numbers. You really want to spend your time chasing a guy who might be dead, might have moved, might never even have existed the way you think? He existed, she said. He existed enough to put his hand on a knife and a doorknob and a phone. He existed enough to walk our streets and clean up his murders like he was doing community service. Yeah? And you think anyone upstairs is going to thank you if you drag the department's past failures into the spotlight? He snorted. You catch him, you make us look bad. You don't catch him, you make us look worse. Either way, they're not giving you a trophy. I'm not doing it for a trophy, she replied, and that was the end of that conversation. The next pushback was quieter, greater. She noticed it in small things, requests taking longer to process, copies of old phone records misplaced, 1 box of archive material that had been moved to a different shelf with a new label, as if someone was trying to slide it out of her reach without touching it with bare hands. Petty, bureaucratic friction. The kind you get when your work starts brushing against invisible walls. She told Marlowe about it on one of their late-night calls, both of them half-lit by the glow of different lamps in different parts of the city. Means you're getting close to something, he said. Could be nothing. Could be some pencil pusher protecting his clearance rate. Could be something darker. You poke old wounds, sometimes you hit nerves that still feel. You ever get this kind of slow walk? She asked. A couple of times, he admitted. One case I pushed through, got the guy, he went away, bosses pretended they said yes all along. Another case, I didn't. I let them bog me down in forms and meetings and priorities. I still see that victim's face when I try to sleep. Learn from my mistakes, kid. If they're trying to make you stop, ask why, then push harder. So she did. The polite request turned firmer. The memos got CC'd higher. She developed a reputation as that detective who won't let go of 79. The one with the whiteboard in her office covered in old faces and red lines, like she was tracking some invisible constellation only she could see. People laughed about it, until they didn't. The moment it stopped being a joke came from somewhere she never expected. A young patrol officer, 24, in over his head on his first week on midnights. He knocked on her door one Thursday, hat twisting in his hands, eyes flicking to the case photos in a way like they were something indecent. "You Ortiz?" he asked. "That's what it says on the door," she replied. "You lost, officer." "Dwyer," he said. I heard you're working old weird stuff, cold cases." His throat bobbed. "I caught a call last night. Domestic, nothing big, guy yelling, neighbors worried, but when I got there, the guy wanted to talk about something else." She gestured to the chair. "Sit." He sat, perched on the edge like the seat might bite him. "He was drunk," Dwyer said. "Said a lot of crap. Most of it I tuned out. But then he started going off about how they never got him. How the cops looked right at him and saw nothing. I tell him to calm down. He tells me we're all still dumber than we were in '79. The year snapped into place like a trap. Ortiz's fingers tightened just slightly around her pen. "Did he say a name?" "Not right away," Dwyer said. "He started rambling about card games, about how, back in the day, you had to know the room or you'd end up on a slab. I figure he's just mouthing off, but then he drops a name. Hayes. Says it like a test. I ask him what he's talking about. He laughs and tells me, 'Ask your cold case freaks about 3B. They'll know.'" Ortiz's heartbeat ratcheted up a notch. "Address?" Dwyer slid a folded slip of paper across the desk with a trembling hand. "Place on the south side." I wrote it down. I wasn't sure if it meant anything, but the way he said it, it felt wrong, like he was daring me to care. "My sergeant told me to chalk it up to drunk talk, but I heard someone on the 4th floor mention your name and that year in the same breath, so," he swallowed. "Here I am." She unfolded the paper. The address wasn't 3B, not anymore. Different street, different building, but the neighborhood was familiar. 3 blocks from the diner where Daniel had worked his last shifts on Earth. "Did he give a name?" she asked, the air in the room sharpening around the question. "Said people used to call him Lou," Dwyer replied. "Didn't get a last name. Said it didn't matter anymore because the only name that counts is the one that never gets written down." He frowned. What does that even mean? To Ortiz, it sounded like a man who'd been in the background of bad things his whole life, who'd learned that staying unnamed was another kind of armor. She thanked Dwyer, told him he'd done the right thing, watched him leave with shoulders slightly lighter. Then she grabbed her coat. The building on the south side sagged under the weight of too many winters. Brick flaking, steps chipped, a smell in the hallway like stale frying oil and old paint. She knocked on the door Dwyer had written down. No answer. Knocked again. Silence. She was sliding her card under the door when the unit across the hall cracked open, a chain catching the edge. "You looking for Lou?" a woman's voice asked, smoker's rasp threading through it. Ortiz turned. "Yeah," the woman snorted. "You're late. He cleared out this morning, packed 2 bags, dumped the 3rd in the hallway, told me I could have whatever I liked. I told him what I like is peace and quiet, and him gone, so I guess I got my wish." "Did he say where he was going?" Ortiz asked. "He said back to where they stopped looking, whatever that means." The woman eyed her badge. "You one of the ones who stopped?" "No," Ortiz said. "I'm one of the ones who started again." The apartment still smelled like him. Sweat, cheap whiskey, the faint sour tang of old fear. He'd left in a hurry. Drawer half open, closet door swinging, toothbrush still damp on the sink. But criminals, if that's what he was, never truly believe they'll have to run. They always leave something. She found it in the kitchen, behind a row of chipped mugs, a small dusty tin, the kind people used to keep cigarette money in. Inside, matchbooks from bars that no longer existed, a snapshot of a group of men at a poker table, and one lone, battered watch. Stainless steel band, black face, digital. She picked it up carefully, as if it might bite. The screen was cracked, the battery long dead. But she pressed the button anyway, a pointless reflex. It gave her nothing. Silent, dark. Still, her hand shook as she slipped it into an evidence bag. She knew it wasn't proof of anything yet. A digital watch on a man who knew Hayes' name, who talked about 3B like an old ghost. It could be coincidence. Chicago was full of men named Lou who liked cards and cheap whiskey. But in the world she inhabited, coincidence rarely arrived alone. She flipped through the snapshot. 4 men at a table, cards fanned, faces lit by the harsh overhead light of a backroom game. One of them was Lou, older now than in '79, but recognizable. Another made her stomach clench. Not because she knew him, but because of the angle of his head, the familiarity and the slope of his shoulders. She'd seen that posture in the Polaroid. The scratched-out figure sitting next to Daniel, the tilt of the torso, the way the hand hovered over the table, casual and claiming like the room belonged to him. The photo was too grainy to be sure. The scratched-out Polaroid too damaged to align perfectly, but her brain did what brains do, filled in gaps, traced echoes. The third man hadn't been completely erased. A ghost outline had survived, just enough to haunt. She took everything, the watch, the snapshot, the matchbooks, the faint impression of a life lived half in the margins and half in the corners of rooms people later described as the wrong place at the wrong time. Then she stepped back into the hall, where the woman across the way watched her with the wary curiosity of someone who's seen too many uniforms and not enough justice. "When they put him on the news," the woman said, "I'll say I told you so." "We're not there yet," Ortiz replied. "You will be," the woman said. "Men like him, they don't run because they're innocent. They run because they're tired." Tired of what? Police, guilt, or a silence that had lasted since 1979. Back at the lab, she slid the watch bag across the counter. "Print it. Swab it. I want everything this thing can give me. Run it against the Hayes knife. Run it against the March 79 door. Run it against your entire damn database if you have to. If there's a molecule on it that doesn't belong to this Lou, I want to know whose it is." The tech raised both eyebrows. "You really think this is it? After 17 years, you think some drunk with a watch is your guy?" "I think," she said slowly, feeling the weight of every dead face pressing against her back, "that if the city's going to pretend we solved 79, we should at least know whose name we're lying about." He bagged it, tagged it, logged it, machines hummed, samples were taken, diluted, amplified, turned into peaks on a graph. Science moved at its own indifferent pace, but a feeling had settled over Ortiz like static before a storm. Something had shifted. A man who knew a dead victim's address, who wore the right watch, who ran the morning after he mentioned Hayes' name to a rookie, that wasn't nothing. That was gravity, tugging on the loose threads of a story everyone had been content to leave unwoven. In another part of the city, in a small house with drawn curtains and too many empty bottles, Marlowe poured himself a drink he didn't need and stared at his own old notes. "You promised, no forced entry. Scene feels staged." Now, added in fresh ink next to words written by his younger hand, another line, "Lou." He didn't know this man, but he knew his type, the kind of guy who'd be in the room without ever being the one everyone looked at, the helper, the fixer, the watcher with the ticking wrist and the calm voice on the line. The man who'd been allowed to walk the city's arteries like a ghost because, in 1979, Chicago hadn't wanted to consider that some killers didn't shout. They whispered. In the cold case office, the phone on Ortiz's desk sat quiet, heavy, waiting. Somewhere in the building, a printer spat out lab reports for other detectives, other crimes. Somewhere in evidence, a stainless steel watch lay under bright light, giving up skin cells one by one. Somewhere in the city, a man named Lou, if that was even his real name, was choosing a direction, keep running, or turn around and stare down the past he thought had forgotten him. The case that had once been stamped inactive was now humming like a live wire. Chicago had called what happened in 1979 solved in whispers and bar talk for years, telling itself a story about a jealous lover and a clean escape. But the truth had never agreed to that ending. It was still here, in the watch, in the photo, in the pattern written across 4 dead bodies. And it was about to drag the city, willingly or not, to a new chapter with a harder title, one nobody could stick in a file and forget. The results came back on a rainy Monday that made the whole city feel like it was breathing through wet cloth. Ortiz was halfway through a stale sandwich at her desk when the lab extension flashed on her phone. She stared at the blinking light for 1 heartbeat, 2, wiped her hands on a napkin and picked up. "Ortiz, got your watch," the tech said. No preamble, no small talk. There was a tension in his voice that made the hairs rise on her arms. "You sitting down?" "Tell me," she said. "We lifted multiple prints," he said. "Most of them belong to your guy, Lou. Matched what you brought in from his apartment. Greasy, partial, consistent. But there's another set, cleaner, older, in spots that suggest primary use. Backplate buttons, band clasp. Those don't match Lou." Her pulse kicked. "Do they match the knife partial from Hayes?" "Yes," he said. "And the March 79 door partial. I've triple-checked. Same pattern, same ghost. Whoever your unknown is, he wore that watch a lot before your friend Lou ever touched it." She let that sink in. The room seemed to narrow, the buzz of the fluorescent light brightening into a thin whine at the edge of her hearing. "So we're not just dealing with a man who knows the story," she said slowly. "We're dealing with a man who's been wearing the killer's skin like a hand-me-down. Or a man who inherited something he should have burned," the tech said. "Either way, your Lou's been close, real close." "Any hit in the database on the unknown?" she asked, though she already felt the answer gathering like a storm. "Nothing," he said. "Not under anything we've got. No arrest record, no prior booking, no military DNA, no nothing. Whoever he is, he's never been where we could swab him, or he's been smarter than everyone else in the room." She thanked him, hung up and sat there, the dial tone echoing in her bones. The watch had just become more than an old accessory. It was a piece of continuity, a line drawn straight through the heart of 1979 into the palms of a man whose name still refused to appear on any piece of official paper. Marlowe answered on the second ring, his voice rough, like he'd been sitting near the phone waiting for it to betray him. "Well?" he asked. "The unknown profile matches the watch," she said. "He wore it. Lou wears it after him. Either they're the same man, or Lou's been orbiting him close enough to borrow his sunburn." Marlowe exhaled way too slow. "Lou ever say how long he'd had it?" "He was gone by the time I got there," she said. "But the band's worn, the backplate's scratched. This thing's lived a life. Lou's is only the ending of it." "You think he's a copycat?" Marlowe asked. "A fan? Someone who knew, admired, picked up the mantle?" "Copycats want attention," Ortiz said. "They want people to notice the echo. Lou's hiding in a one-bedroom walk-up, drinking himself into oblivion and muttering about 3B to rookie cops. That's not admiration, that's contamination. He got too close once and it's been eating him ever since." "Then he's your way in," Marlowe said. "He's the part of the wall that's starting to crack." If she could find him again. The city had already swallowed him once. It could do it again without even changing its stride. She went after him the old way, shoe leather and questions. The landlady gave her a handful of places he'd mentioned in drunk conversation. Bars, an old Union Hall, a friend's couch he'd crashed on back when the snow used to mean something. Ortiz worked the list. At each stop, she held up his photo and got variations of the same refrain. "Lou? Yeah, I know him. Haven't seen him in a bit. Talks too much when he's drunk. Talks too little when he's not. Used to play a decent hand until his nerves went bad." One bartender, deep lines etched around his eyes, remembered more. "He used to come in late," he said, polishing a glass that was already clean. "Same stool, same order, cheap whiskey, no ice. Stared at the door like he was expecting someone to walk in and punch him." "He ever mention Hayes?" Ortiz asked. 1979, South Side, guy in 3B. The bartender's hand stopped moving. "He mentioned a lot of things he shouldn't have," he said slowly. "Old debts, old names. That one came up once. I told him to shut up. Didn't want that kind of story sitting in my bar." "What kind of story?" she pressed. "The kind that makes you realize some people don't just drink to forget," he said. "They drink to keep from talking." He said there was a man who liked to clean his own mess. Said the city never did know which mess was whose. "Did he give you a name?" she asked. The bartender shook his head. "He called him the man with the watch. That's it. Said he kept the time on other people's lives." She left with rain damp on her collar and the sense that she was walking in a circle drawn by someone else's hand. The man with the watch, a phrase a drunk mutters in a bar, a detail in a cleaned-up 911 tape, a digital beep on the edge of a call. The killer had turned his own habit into a rhythm the city never noticed. Back at the station, the pushback turned into pressure. Her lieutenant called her in, closed the door, leaned back in his chair like a judge about to hand down something complicated. "I've been getting calls," he said. "From who?" she asked, though she could guess the category. "Upstairs downtown, people whose ties never came loose." "People who wear better suits than me," he said. "They're asking why a detective in cold case is stirring up talk of linked homicides from the late 70s. They're asking why a case that was considered, informally mind you, wrapped, is suddenly generating memos about serial offenders and behavioral patterns and possible departmental oversight. In other words," she said, "they're asking why we're doing our jobs." "In other words," he said tightly, "they're asking why we're revisiting a time when record-keeping was sloppy and clearing a case sometimes meant convincing yourself the first name you heard was the right one. You start poking at that era, you're not just attacking some unknown killer, Ortiz. You're attacking the history of the department, and history hits back." She felt her temper climb like a slow fuse. "We have DNA linking 4 scenes," she said. "We have a watch that belonged to an unknown offender and ended up on the wrist of a man who's now missing. We have anonymous calls from a voice that doesn't sound surprised to find dead bodies. If we walk away from that because somebody's worried about their legacy, we are part of the crime." He took that in, jaw working. For a moment, she thought he might order her to box it, file it, forget it. Instead, he sighed, a sound of long, bitter experience. "I'm not telling you to stop," he said. "I'm telling you to be smart. This Lou, if you find him, he's your key. You get him talking on tape. You get him tying that watch to a name. You might have something nobody up there can ignore. Until then, keep the phrase serial killer out of your mouth in any room with more than 2 detectives in it." She walked out with the bitter taste of compromise on her tongue. Be smart, be quiet, be relentless. That was the job now. She pinned Lou's photo higher on the board, next to the Polaroid, next to the map. The room looked like it belonged in a thriller, not in the corner office of a municipal building. But thrillers had endings. Real life had walls. Days blurred, leads stretched thin. Then, as always in this case, the thing that moved it forward wasn't high-tech or a stroke of genius. It was an accident. A shoplifting arrest on the west side. Middle-aged man. Tremors in his hands. Eyes that couldn't quite focus. He boosted a bottle of liquor and a watch from a discount display. The responding officer knew enough to still believe in writing up every detail, logged the brand, logged the time, logged the arrest. At processing, the man scratched his name on a form, Louis Carney, born 1949, South Side, no fixed employment, prior arrests for petty theft and disorderly conduct. He was printed, he was photographed, he was dumped in a holding cell to sober up. At 3 in the morning, a database quietly did what it was built to do. It compared the fresh fingerprints to prints from older cases, not homicides. That system was still messier. But to any entry on record, a partial latent from a backroom poker bust in 1976 pinged, then another from a gambling raid in 78. Same man, same Lou. The report landed in a queue where it should have sat until morning. Instead, by one more small accident, a clerk on an overnight shift who liked to clear his tray. The notice went out early. A flag hit Ortiz's workstation. She walked in with her first coffee, logged in, saw the red alert, and felt her heart slam so hard it hurt. Holding. Louis Carney, matched to historic gambling arrests. Location, West Side Precinct. Status, in custody. She didn't call, she didn't ask, she grabbed her coat and went. He looked smaller in person than she'd expected. Years of bad nights had hollowed him out. But when she stepped up to the bars, every line of his face pulled tight, like a man recognizing a verdict he'd been trying to outrun. You, Lou? She asked. Depends who's asking, he said, but his voice fell flat. Detective Ortiz, she said. Cold case. I think you've been waiting for me. They put him in an interview room with a chipped table and a camera in the corner that hummed to life with a soft click. She slid a bottle of water across the table. He stared at it like it might be a trick. You know why you're here? She asked. Shoplifting, he said. Bad habit, old story, the kind I thought you people didn't even bother with unless you were bored. We're never bored, Lou, she said. And you've got more than a bottle and a cheap watch haunting you. His eyes flicked up sharp for the first time. I didn't steal that watch, he said. No, she said quietly. You stole someone else's. She took the stainless steel digital watch out of an evidence bag and laid it on the table between them. The effect was instant. He flinched like she'd set down a snake. I think that used to belong to someone you knew, she said. Someone you were afraid of. The man with the watch. That's what you called him, right? He swallowed, throat working. You don't know what you're talking about. I know he wore that, she said. I know he touched it with the same hand he used to hold a knife in a South Side bedroom in January 79. I know he touched a door handle in March 79, right before a woman bled out on her floor. I know he touched lives in this city and walked away clean. And I know you were close enough to end up with his timepiece on your wrist. Silence. His fingers twitched toward the watch, then stopped halfway, as if an old instinct had yanked them back. You think I killed them, he said finally. You think I'm him. I think you know him, she replied. I think you watched him. Maybe you looked up to him, maybe you were scared of him, maybe both. I think in some back room at some smoky table he slipped that watch off and slid it across to you like a favor or a threat or a test. I think every time it beeped you remembered what he did with his hands. His eyes went to the camera, then back to her. Turn that off, he muttered. Can't, she said. This is the part where you stop running, Lou. You start talking, you tell me his name, and maybe, just maybe, you stop seeing 3B when you close your eyes. The bravado went out of him, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man who'd climbed 50 flights of stairs and found nothing at the top but more stairs. When he spoke, his voice was low, flat, resigned. You think a name fixes this? He asked. You think saying it out loud makes what he did any less real? No, she said. I think it makes it real the right way, on paper, in court, in a file that doesn't lie. Right now, the story says a jealous man killed Hayes and vanished. That's a lie you've been living under for 17 years. He laughed once, brittle. Jealous, that's what they called it. That what they told you? That's what they told themselves, she said. I'm asking you for the truth. He stared at the watch, at its dead face reflecting the room's fluorescent glare. When he spoke again, the words came slow like they hurt on the way out. He wasn't jealous, Lou said. He was careful. He didn't kill because he was angry. He killed because people stopped doing what he wanted. He dragged his gaze up to meet hers. You want his name, detective? You better be ready for the rest of it. Because once you write it down, this isn't just some cold case anymore. This is a story your whole city has been pretending not to remember. The room seemed to lean in. The camera hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a copier clattered, oblivious. Ortiz's pen hovered over her notepad. I'm ready, she said. He watched her for another long second, as if testing her for cracks. Then he took a breath that sounded like surrender. His name, Lou said quietly, is not the one you think it is. It was never Kane. That was a joke, a ghost, a shadow we let you chase. His real name was... And then the door opened. An officer stuck his head in, face pale, eyes wide. Detective, he said, voice too loud in the small room. We've got a situation. Upstairs wants you, now. The moment snapped like a wire. Lou jerked back, words swallowed. The watch sat between them, silent, dead, heavy. Ortiz didn't move for a heartbeat, every instinct in her screaming to shut the door, to lock it, to throw the officer out and drag the rest of the name out of Lou's throat. But the city had its own timing, its own alarms, its own way of interrupting the truth at the exact moment it's about to step into the light. The word now hangs in the air like a slap. The officer's silhouette fills the doorway, the hallway light behind him turning his face into a washed-out blur. Lou flinches like the shout came with handcuffs. Ortiz doesn't move. Every instinct in her says stay, sit, lock the door, finish the sentence, drag the name all the way into daylight. But hierarchy is its own kind of weapon. When upstairs calls, you move. She sets her pen down slowly, like planting a flag. Don't say another word, she tells Lou, eyes locked on his. Not to anyone, not until I'm back in this chair. He smirks weakly, that bitter, resigned little twist of the mouth that men get when they've seen too much of how the system works. Yeah, he says, because it always waits for you, right? The officer shifts, impatient. Detective. I heard you, she snaps, standing. She slides the watch back into its evidence bag, never taking her eyes off Lou. Look at me, she says quietly. You started this. You don't get to stop halfway. We're not done. For a fraction of a second, something like relief flickers across his face, buried under the fear. Then it's gone, smothered by all the years he's spent trying not to remember. Hurry up, he mutters. Time's not on your side. She walks out into the hallway, the door closing behind her with a heavy, hollow sound. The officer falls into step next to her as they head toward the elevators, the institutional hum of the building swallowing the tension. What's the emergency, she asks. Lieutenant said a deputy superintendent's on his way down, the officer says. Brought a suit from the state's attorney's office. Wants you in the conference room before they get here. Something about controlling the narrative. Her jaw tightens. Controlling the... She cuts herself off. Of course. The moment a story threatens to spill out of a small interview room and stain something bigger, the cavalry arrives, not the kind with guns, the kind with ties. The conference room feels colder than the rest of the floor. Fluorescents buzz overhead. A pot of coffee steams on a side table, untouched. Her lieutenant is already there. Sleeves rolled up, tie loose, the weight of the building on his shoulders. He looks at her with the weary eyes of someone who tried to hold back a tide and got salt in his lungs. Sit, he says. They'll be here any second. Who exactly, she asks. You'll see. She doesn't have to wait long. Two men come in together, moving with the smooth, practiced confidence of people used to walking into rooms and rearranging reality. The first is tall, broad-shouldered, uniform, sharp enough to cut on, silver at the temples. Deputy superintendent. The second is in a dark suit, neat beard, an expression that says he's already thinking 3 steps ahead. Assistant state's attorney. Between them, the case stops being a private obsession and becomes a possible liability. Detective Ortiz, the deputy says, offering a hand she doesn't take. You've been busy. I've been doing my job, she says. The ASA gives her a measured look, like he's checking for cracks. We've been reviewing some of your recent activity, he says. Cold case crosslinks, requests for old evidence, interviews with vulnerable individuals regarding incidents from 1979. Vulnerable, she repeats. That what we're calling accomplices now? The deputy's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Let's take a breath, he says. Nobody's accusing you of anything. Quite the opposite. Your work's been thorough. Thorough enough to make people upstairs nervous, she says. You didn't drag me out of an interrogation to compliment my file organization. What's the problem? The ASA flips open a folder, the paper inside so crisp it might have been printed on the way up. The problem, he says calmly, is that you're circling an unofficial conclusion the department quietly relied on for nearly 2 decades. And you're doing it with terms like serial offender and pattern behavior that could, if handled poorly, expose us to litigation from families and defendants who believed their cases were resolved. Those cases weren't resolved, she snaps. They were shoved in a drawer and labeled good enough. We have a partial DNA profile that shows the same unknown individual at multiple homicide scenes. We have staging, we have anonymous calls, we have a witness sitting downstairs who was about to put a name to the ghost you all pretended didn't exist. The deputy's gaze hardens. And that's exactly why we're here, he says. Because if you hang an entire decade's worth of investigative decisions on the word of one drunk degenerate clinging to an old watch, you're not solving a cold case. You're setting off a bomb in this building. She laughs once, incredulous. So what, we just don't ask? We leave Hayes and the others as footnotes in the messy 70s chapter? We let some clever psychopath stay a ghost because it's administratively convenient? This isn't about convenience, the ASA says. It's about risk. Evidence degrades, memories erode, procedures change. You know how many wrongful conviction claims we have breathing down our necks already? You formally tie 4 homicides together and suggest we had a serial predator in this city that we didn't catch. Every defense attorney in Illinois is going to dig through every case file from that era looking for leverage. Maybe they should, she shoots back. Maybe the truth is more important than your comfort. He doesn't flinch. Truth is only useful if you can prove it, he says. Right now you have a partial DNA pattern, a few behavioral overlaps, and a man whose mental state is at best compromised. If we go public before we have a solid prosecutable name, we don't get justice, we get chaos. And chaos doesn't help Hayes, it doesn't help anyone. So what's your ask, she says. Because you didn't drag a deputy down here just to scold me, you want something. They glance at each other, the silent communication of men who have spent years in the same meetings. The deputy leans forward, voice dropping. We want you to slow down, he says. You continue your review, quietly. You coordinate with the state's attorney's office before you interview any more potential witnesses or suspects. You do not, under any circumstances, use the term serial in any report. You do not contact media. You do not reach out to victims' families with theories we can't back in court. And you do not promise that man downstairs anything you can't deliver. Her blood snaps. I promised him nothing, she says. He promised me a name. And you'll get it, the ASA says smoothly, if he's willing to talk. But that conversation happens with counsel present, with me in the loop, with consideration for the fact that he may be placing himself at risk. I'm not about to sit on a confession if it comes. That's not what this is. This is about pace, control, caution. Control. There it is again, that word that keeps floating through this case like a bad smell. Someone always wants control. The killer in the bedroom, the anonymous caller on the line, the bureaucrats in the conference room. She stares at them, wanting to throw the chair, the coffee pot, the whole building through the window. Instead, she forces her jaw to unclench. Fine, she says, each letter bitten off. You want in the room, you get in the room. But I'm going back down there now. Every minute you keep me here is a minute he's got to change his mind. The deputy nods, satisfied at winning a battle he thinks matters. We'll join you presently, he says. Give us 10 minutes. She doesn't give them 10. She barely gives them 5. As soon as she's out of the conference room, she's moving, steps hard and fast down the hallway, her body humming with an urgency that feels like electricity in her veins. The elevator takes too long. She takes the stairs. The door to the interview room is closed. The observation room next to it is dark. She pushes the interview door open so hard it bangs against the stopper. The chair across the table is empty. The watch is still there. For one frozen second, the world goes silent, then her brain catches up. She spins into the hallway. Where is he? She barks at the nearest uniform. The officer blinks, startled. Who? The man I was interviewing, Carney. Where is he? The officer's face drains of color. I thought he was still with you. Panic is useless in a building like this. It just fogs the edges of the picture. She forces air into her lungs, forces her voice steady. Check holding. Now, cameras too. Minutes stretch, elastic and cruel. A sergeant jogs up, breathless, sweat beating at his hairline. We got it, he says, shoving a grainy printout into her hand. It's a still from this hallway camera. Timestamp 12 minutes after she left. Lou in frame, flanked by a young officer she recognizes. Night shift. New. A little too eager to please. Paper in Lou's hand. They're headed toward the processing area. Another angle shows them at the door to the medical wing. Then nothing. There was a flag on his file, the sergeant says. Psych hold recommendation from a previous arrest. Someone upstairs saw the note, ordered him evaluated, medical came and got him. Standard mental health protocol. Who signed the order? She asks. He hesitates. Came from upstairs. Of course it did. She looks at the still again, the paper in Lou's hand. Not medical forms. Too small, folded, personal. Her gut twists. She goes back into the interview room. The air still holds the residue of his presence. Cigarettes on his clothes, old fears sweating out of his pores. The watch sits in the middle of the table, dead glass reflecting the overhead light. Next to it, half tucked under the edge of the metal, is something she hadn't seen in the rush to leave. A post-it note, yellow, curling at one corner, 3 words in jagged, shaky handwriting. Lantern, basement, October. Her heart knocks hard against her ribs. Lantern, the rust lantern, long since burned out of existence, sign taken down, windows boarded, eventually gutted and turned into condos. Basement, the back room that became storage. October, a month she hasn't pinned anything to. Yet. She snatches it up, holds it like it might evaporate. Lou hadn't trusted the room, he hadn't trusted the camera, so he'd done the one thing he could do, left a breadcrumb. The deputy and the ASA arrive then, walking in mid-conversation, expressions composed. They stop when they see the empty chair. Where is he? The deputy demands. Medical, she says shortly. Someone saw a note and decided he needed evaluation. The ASA's gaze flicks to the table, to the watch, to her hand clenching the post-it. Did he talk? He asks. Not about what matters, she says. Not yet. You better be ready for the rest of it. That's what Lou said. Lantern, basement, October. A direction, not a confession. A map folded into 3 jagged words. We'll arrange to be present for his psych interview, the ASA says. In the meantime, you'll brief me on what he already told you. She looks at him, at the deputy, at the institutional walls that have stood between truth and daylight for decades. He told me, she says slowly, that Cain was never real, that we were chasing a name someone wanted us to chase. He told me there was a man who cleaned his own mess, who kept time on other people's lives, and he told me you're not going to like what happens when his real name hits paper. That's not a name, the deputy says. That's a story. That's how they survive, she replies. As long as they stay stories, not people, they can't be touched. This, she holds up the post-it. This is him starting to turn a story into a place. Lantern, basement, October. I'm going to find out what happened in that bar cellar 1 October before Hayes died. And when I do, I'm writing every word of it into your nice, clean narrative. The ASA's jaw tightens. You will coordinate, he repeats. No more cowboy moves, not with this many eyes on you. Sure, she says, slipping the note into her pocket, the paper hot against her thigh. You'll get your memos. What she doesn't say is that ghosts don't wait for committee approval. They knock when they're ready. And Lou has just knocked. That night, she doesn't go home. She goes to where the rust lantern used to be. The bar is gone, but the bones of the building are the same, the way old scars stay under new tattoos. The condos are quiet, lights off in most windows. She walks the perimeter, feeling the shape of the street, the angle of the alley, the way the city's noise shifts as you turn the corner. She finds the service entrance that used to lead to the basement, now barred by a locked metal door with fresh paint. Fresh compared to 1979, anyway. She leans her forehead against the cold steel, closes her eyes, tries to see it the way it was. Smoke, laughter, clink of glasses, the thrum of a jukebox. And under it, the muffled sound of something else. A struggle, a plea, a promise. October, 1 year before Hayes, 1 month that doesn't show up in any of the files. No body, no report, no man down call, which means whatever happened down there either never made it upstairs or got buried before it could grow teeth. Her phone vibrates, Marlowe's number. You sound like you're outside, he rasps. Wind's different in your voice when you are. I'm at the Lantern, she says, or what's left of it. He's quiet for a moment. October, he says. He wrote that? How do you know, she asks, pulse spiking. Because there was a rumor, Marlowe says slowly. Back then, before Hayes, a kid went missing, card runner, messenger, used to flip between games. Last seen heading down the stairs at the Rust Lantern one night in October. No body ever found, no report ever filed, just whispers. And then the game moved. People said the kid just took off. I never believed it. Kids who run don't leave their whole lives hanging on hooks. Why wasn't there a report, she demands. Because no one with the badge was ever officially told, he says. Not in a way that could survive paper. You're not just chasing a killer, Ortiz. You're chasing the spaces in this city where killers and cops pretended not to see each other for a while. You dig into that basement, you're going to find more than one ghost. She looks up at the dark windows, at the locked door, at the street that has learned to forget what used to happen here. Good, she says. I'm tired of talking to just one. The case that started in 3B has spilled out into streets and basements in years, dragging names and habits and ghosts behind it. The city once told itself that Hayes died in a simple, jealous rage, that the case was solved in all the ways that mattered. Now, under the weight of a dead watch and a living witness and 3 words on a yellow square, that story is cracking. Lantern, basement, October. Somewhere under this concrete, the real beginning of 1979 is waiting. And Ortiz knows, with a certainty that feels like vertigo, that when she finds it, the name Lou almost spoke in that small room won't just belong to a man. It'll belong to a whole era that thought it could keep its bargains buried.